I just want to welcome all of you for coming today. This is amazing. The turnout today is just wonderful. Thank you all for being here. My name is Tammy. I'm from Rebel Canners. I have a Facebook group and a YouTube channel, and we're going to be kind of doing things in tandem. I know the schedule says that we're doing one, then the other. We don't want to make you sit here and watch the canners come up to pressure, so we're just going to kind of be going back and forth doing everything together. And this is Sarah Thrush from Peelies and Petals. Go ahead, Sarah. Tell them about
Can you
yourself.
guys hear me? All right, good. Could you guys hear Tammy? Yeah. Okay, good.
We can hear you now.
All right, well, I get kind of loud, so I'm making the sound technicians really work today. I'm Sarah, and I come from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I don't know if you guys saw me this morning do my little keynote speak. I'm from pretty far away. We chose to homestead on probably one of the more difficult climates in the world to homestead on. That was a great idea. But we love it up there, absolutely love it. And so I'm a generational canner. Canning's been in my family for a lot of years. I grew up like this. This is a lifestyle that we enjoy. We get a lot of joy out of this. It also helps us to stock our shelves, so we have all of our bounties throughout our very long, very, very long and harsh winters. So today we're going to show you a couple different canning recipes. We're going to talk about the canners and how they work, and answer questions that you guys may have. I know people have a lot to do today. There's a lot to see, so definitely come and go as you need to, and we're going to be here until at least 4:30, 5 o'clock on these canners, so we're here to help. Tammy is going to start off with milk.
I have 2 recipes in my Facebook group that get the most attention. Everybody asks me, how do you can milk? How do you make candied jalapenos, which are cowboy candy? So we're going to start with the milk because the milk is actually the easiest thing. It is a very rebel thing to can because it doesn't follow any of the regular rules for canning. So I have taken the milk out of the refrigerator this morning and let it sit. I wanted it to get to room temperature. I wanted my jars at room temperature, and the water in my canner is going to be room temperature. The jars, you don't want to have thermal shock. So whatever you start out with, if you start out with a hot product, you would want a hot jar, and then you would want a hot water in your canner. Because this is something that goes bad when you get it too hot. We want to cook it quickly in the canner, so we're starting out at room temperature. So. You're just going to go ahead. I've already sanitized the jars. I've already rinsed the lids. I'm all ready to go here. I've already slopped milk all over the table. And I just fill up. You don't need a lot of headspace with this, so I'm just filling up here. On this one, it's telling me that that's a 1/2 inch headspace. My little cheat on the funnel there. I'm going to go ahead and repeat with all the jars. Somebody asked a good question yesterday. They asked me why I didn't treat milk as a protein. The chemical name for milk is lactic acid. So that's why milk doesn't follow a lot of the other rules, is because it is an acid. I may not have enough for that jar. Oh, I did. I just made it. Perfect. So that's 9 pints. Depending on your gallon, it should make 9 pints, but sometimes they're a little off. Or sometimes your kids have already got to the gallon and opened it up. So Now, the other thing about milk, we've all been taught, you use vinegar, right? You put vinegar in your canner, especially if you have hard water. You wipe your jar with vinegar around the rim, right? The problem with milk is milk plus vinegar equals cottage cheese. So if you're making milk, use only water in your canner and use only water when you're wiping the rims. Otherwise, you'll be asking me, why did your milk curdle?
And while Tammy's getting those jars ready, I'm going to talk a little bit about milk also. So one of the common questions I hear is, what does the end product of milk taste like? Well, it depends on what you start with. So when we are canning milk, if you like a whole milk, if that's what you like to drink, then you want to start with something less than whole milk. So you want to start with 2%. If you like to drink 2%, you want to start with 1%. Because what happens in the canner when you put things under pressure is it changes the end product sometimes. And so that milk has sugar in it, and it can become a little bit thicker. So your end product will be a little bit different than what you started with. You can also do oat milk. You could also do goat's milk. You could do raw milk as long as you've separated that cream off. So there's lots of different ways to can milk. If you are just new to canning milk or any type of dairy products in general, I always suggest starting with a small batch. Don't ruin an entire gallon of milk. Don't run a whole full canner. Start with a small batch of 1, 2, 3 jars. See what you like about the end product before you invest in putting a bunch of money into that canner. Did you have a question?
So if you put whole milk in there, will you end up with more like a heavy whipping?
Okay, so the temperature of the milk, we're going to do room temperature in the canner, room temperature, everything. The temperature isn't going to change the end result. What changes the end result is what happens to the milk when it gets heated under pressure. Does that make sense? Okay, go ahead, Tammy, sorry.
Lost my place.
You were going to talk about...
So, I actually did all of these while we were, I'm going to take this one off. So, with these lids, you only want to do 3 fingers. I can't count. I'm a rebel. I'm not going to do just 3, even though they say, you know. And just until the jar starts to turn. You don't need to do the torque, you know. Just 3 fingers until the jar turns. It should be all one motion, okay? We went to the factory, and they actually tested. And who would have thought that I'm a 14.8, and Sarah, what did you get on the machine? How far you?
A 0.6.
So
So when we talk finger tight, there's lots of different, we both use the word finger tight, but until we actually calibrated that on the machine and saw what finger tight is, we are very different canners. Very different. So. The thing with tightening your jars, and I'll show you some finger tight here in a second too when Tammy's done, but the thing with tightening your jars is once you let go of that ring, once you let go of it, and then you start to torque it, you lose the torque. It changes the amount of tension that you're putting on the ring of the jar. So yes, Tammy was sitting at like a 14 consistently, and I could not hit a 1. I was like, I cannot over tighten my jar more than that. So yeah, we had some
Very
different canning. Oh no, that one's mine.
Those are
Thank
hers.
you. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
So yesterday we showed this from start to finish, and it took a lot longer. We're using a little bit different stove than what I'm used to and stuff. So in order for Sarah to have a canner to do her chicken in a minute, I am going to kind of do the Julia Child method, where we talk about it, but we don't really do it for a minute. So these now are ready. They're room temperature. They're lit. The lid is on. I would put them in the canner. All right, and just like I would for anything else, I'd have my water in there, and then I'm going to let it vent. I'm going to let it vent where the steam would come out of the vent port for 10 minutes, just like you're supposed to do every time you can. I'm going to put my... I'm pressure canning it. Pressure canning it. So you guys all have a jiggler, right, of some sort. or you have just the gauge.
I don't have enough time, so we're just not going to do the chicken. Okay.
Do you know
Thank you,
what
though.
your pressure is for your altitude? All right,
Oh,
so
she
you
brought
all
me
know
another
that you're
jar.
either a 5, a 10, or a 15, wherever you are canning. And if you move, you need to check and see if you're still at the same altitude that what you're supposed to use. I told you milk is the exception to every rule you've been taught. I am a 10. Where my altitude is, I should be canning at 10 every time I pressure can. Milk is an exception, it's one lower. So if you are up in the mountains and you use a 15, you would use a 10. If you're at my altitude where you're a 10, you would use a 5. And if you're down at sea level in Florida and you always use a 5, you're still going to use a 5 because that's the lowest you can go. So for milk, it's one of the few exceptions. There are several, like 4 or 5. But milk is one of those exceptions. And you would just put on, I gotta stay by my mic. You would go ahead and you would vent that for 10 minutes. You would put it on 5. You would bring it up to pressure. So on my gauge, it would say, now I'm at 5 pounds of pressure. As soon as my canner says it's at 5 pounds of pressure, I turn it off. Because the other exception that milk is there's no time. It just needs to come up to that pressure and shut off. And then I take my canner and I leave it on my stove. I turn my stove off and I do not touch that canner until it's cool to the touch and I can touch it. Once it's completely cool to the touch, then I would go ahead and take my weight off. And then I can open it up.
With this one?
No, this one. This is the one we did yesterday. It's had all night to cool. We've taken the weight off. We've opened it up. So once it's completely cooled, this is like a couple hours later, you can take it out of the canner. Huh? It is the same as what I always do with the All-American. It's 3 quarts.
So your canner, make and model, in the manual will tell you how much water it needs.
Yep.
Every single make and model is different. So whether you buy a Presto or an All-American, a 921 or a 910, they're going to be different. For the All-American, for this one, it's 2 to 3 inches of water. 2 to 3 inches. That's a predetermined amount. So that never changes no matter what you're doing.
And if you're my mother, she taught me this. It's right there to over top of that knuckle. Stick your finger in, and if it's not wet over your knuckle, you need more water. So that's the finger test.
There's all kinds of, yeah.
So
Yeah. So when I'm doing test batches of anything, a new recipe or something I've never tried before, I typically start with a smaller amount of jars so I don't end up with something that I don't really like. So to keep the jars from knocking around in the pressure canner, what I do is I put in jars of water. And then I pressure can with jars of water. And then at the end of that, you can toss the water if you like, or now you have emergency drinking water on your shelves. So we keep ours for emergency drinking water. I also do something, I think Tammy does this also, but you can make your own saline for like wound cleaning. And so I will take the cheap Walmart washcloths and I will usually cut those in half, roll it up, stick it in the jar with the water, add a half a teaspoon of non-iodized salt. I put that in with the washcloth, and then when I've run the canner, I now have an emergency wound cleaning pack. So you can have emergency drinking water on your shelves, or you could make something like a saline pack, but you definitely want to fill up the canner enough with enough jars that they're not going to rattle around in there and break each other. Great question.
you need to have that space that you're full for your steam to be able to circulate around the jars. So you want to make sure, if you can, to run a full canner load. If you don't have a full canner load, do water. It's great to have it on the shelf for emergency preparedness. And I love it because like sometimes I can take it camping with me. A lot of things I take, then I don't have to have the cooler. I'm not worried about it spilling. It's all sealed. It's perfect for that. It's already pre-measured. And my motto is it takes just as much space to store this jar empty on my shelf as it does to store this jar with something in it. So if I'm going to be wasting or using my energy and my resources to do a canner load, it's so much better to have something in it, in my jar on the shelf. And then they're still clean. That water's sterile in there. I can open it up. I can dump that water in my canner to use when I'm canning the next load if I need that jar, if I need those jars. My jar is already clean. It's already rinsed. It's ready to go. So it's a win-win for me to run an extra jar of water in my canner.
Canning chicken?
Canning chicken.
Canning chicken. First of all, who in here already cans meat? Quite a few? All right, great. So some of this is going to be repeat for you guys, but maybe we'll go to some new stuff. Meat is one of my favorite things to run in the pressure canner, and I'm going to tell you why. Couple reasons. One, I am lazy in a way that is, I work hard so I can be lazy later. And I like to have meat on my shelves because I want to be lazy when dinner time comes. I don't want to start thinking about what I'm going to cook at 5, 6 o'clock at night, and I'm not a meal planner. So I am also not good at taking stuff out of the freezer and remembering to get it to thaw. So by having meats on my shelves, I literally can go, maybe we're going to have, taco bake tonight. And I go grab a can of taco meat off the shelf, and then all I'm doing is throwing that dish together. I don't have to thaw anything. I don't have to cook anything. It's done. So for me, it's a convenience aspect of it, and I do pressure can all of our meats, almost all of them. I try not to keep very much in the freezers at all. So meat is one of my favorite things. I brought a jar here of the chicken done before. Now, before you look at this, we do call this ugly chicken in my house. This is ugly. If you have never seen meat canned in a jar before, there's a reason why the grocery stores do not show you what is in the jar. They wouldn't be able to sell it to you, okay? So if you've never canned meat before, this is a perfectly normal looking chicken in a jar. You're gonna see things like fat. You're gonna see things like the broth, and it's not gonna look very appetizing, but I can tell you right now, this is the most delicious jar of chicken you have ever had in your life. So we're gonna can chicken today, and I'm gonna start with this because it's such a simple recipe and it allows me to talk a little bit about the pressure canners and how they work while I'm working. So I'm starting with chicken breast, boneless, skinless chicken breast. Can you can chicken with the bone? Yep, sure can. But it takes up a lot of valuable space inside those jars. So it's something that I don't really prefer to do. I like to get more meat in the jar, leave the bones out, so I will debone a lot of my chicken. You can also can them with the skins on, but you're gonna get more fat in your jar. So I'm just starting off with boneless, skinless chicken breast. I have just cubed these up, 1.5, 2 inch squares, and I'm just gonna pack those into my jars. Now, because I'm starting with something called raw pack, this is just a raw meat. I have not cooked this at all. I'm going to start with a cold canner. And what I mean by cold is just room temperature. You don't have to stick it in your refrigerator or do anything crazy with it. Just room temperature, everything is what I'm starting with. This is considered the raw pack method because you're starting with raw meat. You can also do this with cooked chicken or cooked meat, but your end products might be slightly drier. So what I'm doing in this jar is I'm creating a mini pressure cooker. Pressure canning is pressure cooking in a jar. So if you've ever had pressure cooked meat before and it's all tender and it falls apart, that's what happens inside of these jars. So the great thing about this is you can take cheaper cuts of meat and make them delicious and tender. You can take those cheaper cuts of meat and make them taste like they're really super expensive.
Yeah. Take advantage of the buy one, get one free sales. you're like, oh, I don't know if that looks very, like it's gonna.
Oh, the chicken?
It's a little,
Yeah, the meat.
or your beef or whatever. It's like, oh, it's a little grizzly. I don't know if I want that. It will be tender in the pressure cooker.
So the one thing about raw packing is your meat is going to create its own broth. Now, Tammy and I have different approaches to this, and you may have a different approach in your kitchen as well. Remember, you're trying to feed your family the stuff that you like, so this is how we do it in my house. Tammy likes a lot of broth, so she adds a little bit of water to all of her jars to create that extra broth because she likes the gravy.
I'm a gravy, I want potatoes and gravy. That's what I grew up on. That's what I want. So I am putting the extra water in there because I want to make gravy with whatever, I'm going to have potatoes and gravy as the side for whatever I'm using my chicken or my beef for. So I put the water in there, and then I have an extra product when I'm done canning.
I don't like a lot of gravy or a lot of juice. This is the jar that I canned yesterday. I put no water in it at all. I don't know if you can see that water line, but it's about 2 inches to the top of the jar. So I have a lot of juice in here, and I like mine more concentrated. So if I want to make a gravy, I can add a little bit of water later, but I like the flavor of the meat better when I only can it in its own juice. So again, different approaches, same end result. You can do the same thing in your kitchens. I'm going to pack this chicken in the jar like I'm packing a 2-week vacation in an overnight bag. That's how I roll with all of my meats in the jar because I like to get as much meat in the jar as I can. I don't want to store excess jars if possible. I want to get a full meal in a jar. So what's a full meal in a jar? Well, that depends on the size of your family. So these pint-sized jars will hold 2 cups, which is about 1 pound to 1.5 pounds of meat. So when you're planning out how many jars am I going to need for that half a cow I'm buying, if you're lucky enough to be able to afford half a cow, if anybody wants to go in on half a cow, I'm down. And in your quart jars, you're going to get about 2 pounds to 2.5 pounds of meat. So if I'm feeding a family of 3 and I'm making a casserole, 1 pint-sized jar is going to be enough for us because I'm adding the casserole ingredients to it and I'm making a big dish out of it. If I'm just serving the meat, I'm going to probably go for a larger jar so we get more pounds per person out of that meal.
Or if you have teenage boys like me.
Yeah. We have 5 children. There's never any leftovers, ever. Doesn't matter what we do. What else do I want to say about the meat? Yes, ma'am. So her question is, if I'm doing ground beef, like a taco meat, do I ground it before I put it in there? I do. I will ground the beef first, add all of my seasonings, pack it into my jar, and process it for meat times. So what you'll hear us say in the canning community a lot is, well, how long do I run that for? And we'll say meat times. Because meat times is like that generic coverall of every meat is done, with the exception of fish, every meat is done at the basic 75-minute pints, 90-minute quarts. And you want to write that down, 75 minutes pints, 90 minutes quarts. Anytime you have anything with meat in it, except fish. Fish is longer.
If you don't pre-brown your hamburger, you're gonna become a rebel and you're gonna make meatloaf in that jar.
Yeah.
So
which is also fine.
It's also very delicious.
Yeah.
But it's also really hard to get it out and then do something like tacos with. You're gonna have to really break it up. So when you brown it, it keeps it separated into the size pieces that you put in the jar.
All right, so I'm done filling my jars, and if you could believe this, I had the exact amount of chicken I needed. Woohoo! So if you were using a broth or a water in this at this point, what you would do is something we call debubbling. And that means you would run a wooden skewer or something that is non-reactive, not a metal, down into that jar. Tammy's got a fancy one. I'm the Dollar Tree version. I like a wooden skewer because I can get a 100-pack of these for $1.25 at the Dollar Tree, and this is how I roll. And then when I'm done with them, I use them in the garden. So anyhow, they do make really nice debubblers for this. And that is just to remove the bubbles inside of the jar. You're never going to truly remove all the bubbles in your jars. I hate to tell you. because once you cook the food, it's going to start to boil. And as it boils, it starts to make bubbles. So a lot of times you'll pull your jars out and you're like, why are they bubbling? I debubbled. That's why. But we want to do that as best as possible. And the reason for that is your jars need to be, the food inside the jars, it needs to be exposed to certain temperatures and parameters to make that food shelf safe. And so if you have these big air pockets inside of your jars, then that air pocket doesn't heat to the same temperature as the rest of the jar. And that's what we're trying to get away from. A lot of canning and pressure canning that makes things safe doesn't actually have anything to do with what's in the jar. It's the consistency and the thickness of what's in the jar. How can we heat that thoroughly? So a lot of times when we talk these rebel or outlaw recipes, it's because we are testing things and we are doing things in the kitchen that haven't been tested. And so because they haven't been tested, they say they haven't been approved. Approved and tested are two different words. If I've been doing something in my kitchen for 30 years and I'm still standing here to teach you, I'm going to call that approved, all right? I'm going to call that approved. But we haven't done a lot of testing and canning. I don't know if you guys know this. We haven't done a lot of testing and canning since the 1960s in this country. And there are a lot of countries that have a lot of different canning and preservation techniques that as Americans we may look at and go, whoa, okay? So I'm very cognizant of that when I teach, that we all have different budgets, we all have different resources, and the goal at the end of the day is to get the food on the shelves, right? We're at a food independence summit. So I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but here I am cleaning the jars. What I'm doing is wiping the rims with some white vinegar, and this serves a couple purposes. One, it removes any of the food particles or juice or anything that may be on the rim of the jar. And I want that because as this makes its own broth and juice, some of those fat cells from the animal can escape in that juice, and then I won't get a good seal. And I want a good seal on my jars. Two, it also gives me the opportunity to look for any cracks or nicks or anything that may be on the rim of the jar. If you have any of that, your jar's not going to seal good again. So as you're listening to me say all these things, remember, if you have a lid failure, to go and do a mental checklist. Did I wipe the rims? Did I have any cracks in my rims? Did I over-tighten my rings? Like, there's certain things that you can check off in your own mind as to why did my jars not seal for me this time? Most of the time it's a small user error. Sometimes it's the lids. Now we get to the lids. Yep. Yes. I believe fish is 100 minutes for a... Oh, you're making me pull out a canning book out of my head. I believe fish is 100 minutes for a quarter pint. Am I wrong? Half pint.
110 minutes for a quart.
All right, there you go. 110 for fish.
90.
Which brings me to the lids, right? So I've been canning for decades and decades. These are obviously new to all of us because this is a new company. This is the Superb canning lids. And this is what I have been switching over to. I have purposely tried to make these suckers fail. I have filled jars to the very brim. I have over-tightened my rings. I have done vacuum sealing in these, water bath canning, pressure canning. And don't tell Superb, but I've been reusing a lot of them to try to see if they seal a second time, and they do. My bosses aren't looking. Hey, Mike, what's up? Yeah.
Why buy somebody else's if theirs can be used for something?
Right. So I'm really impressed with these lids so far. Question?
Is it possible to pack them too tightly with me and like impact the cooking temperature in the center of the jar?
Not really.
No.
Not really. Because I don't know if you can see my chicken here, but I pack it pretty tight. And I pack it with only about 1/4 to 1/2 inch headspace at the top. And this is my end product. And you can see it's still pretty tight in there. And this is how I do mine. It does not affect the safety of it because the chicken is cooking and making its own broth. Or you can add water, and so that water heats to the effective temperature that it needs and surrounds the food inside of the jar. Great question. Thank you. I'm short a lid? No. Here we go.
I got one over here.
So now, question? What? Okay.
No, I have a lid over here.
Oh, you have a lid. I got it. I got it. I found it. Which brings me to finger tight. Tammy kind of covered this. I'm just going to cover it again real quick. Finger tight means something different to everybody. I think we know that. Tammy tests like Hulk and I'm like Nemo. I use 3 fingers on my canning ring. And I'm going to hold this up so you can see this, but I would do this on my countertop, not on a tablecloth, not on a silicone mat, nothing that's going to give me resistance. And I put that ring on, and then I just spin it with my fingers and I don't stop spinning it until it engages with the jar and the jar begins to spin. That for me is finger tight. Now the reason that this is important with these particular types of lids, if you've never used these before, the suction power on them is incredible. Yeah. Incredible. If you over tighten these rings, then what you're going to get is buckling. And most of the time, 9 times out of 10, if your lid buckles on you, it's an over tightened ring. 9 times out of 10. All right.
Operator error is what we call
Yes. So here I've started with 3 inches of water in this particular canner, and I have given a little splash of vinegar. I put a splash of vinegar in my canners, water bath or pressure canning, because we have well water, we have hard water, but this can do this with city tap water as well. What happens is when you boil water, steam, under pressure, anything that's in that water can cloudy up your jars. Any of that residue can kind of get stuck. Is it going to affect the safety of your food? Nope, absolutely not. But it is a bugger to get off. So once they're on those jars, they're really hard to clean. You're going to spend a lot of extra time in the kitchen that you may not want to. And so ounce of prevention, pound of. Thank you. So I'm going to put these in there with a little bit of vinegar and
So
the 3
Sarah,
inches of water.
You didn't talk about salt.
Salt.
Did you
I
put
didn't. Nope, no salt.
Yep.
No salt. So if you are on salt restrictions and you are using a pressure canner, salt is not needed.
Salt in that amount is not a preservative. So you're not putting it in there for safety. You're only putting it in there for your taste.
Which is, I think, a canning mystery. We have these canning mysteries and myths and wives' tales and things that are passed down from generation to generation, like women should not can when they are. So all these things we know are pretty much not scientifically based, but they're done out of respect to the canning, the history of it, right? Salt is one of those things. The salt is not needed in pressure canning. Salt is not a preservative in pressure canning. The pressure canner does that for you. As you are putting these jars in here, they're heavy. My 3 inches of water is now rising up to the level of my jars. It's a little bit over my jars, which makes me think I should use Tammy's finger method because I think I put too much water in it. So I'm going
Right
to
to
remove
here,
a little.
first knuckle.
But what
It's
I wanted to say was,
The big one.
as you put these jars in, because they are heavy, your water levels are going to rise. That is normal for them to rise. Do not panic. If it seems like it's a little too high like I am right now, I think I just added a little bit too much. So with water bath canning, we always dunk everything completely under. Tammy's going to show us some Cowboy Candy here in a minute, and the jars get submerged. But in pressure canning, we don't need that because we're creating an environment in here that is steam, not water. The reason that I can pressure can this meat and make it safe for my shelf is because I am heating it above boiling. So water will boil at 212? Somebody? Yeah, okay, thanks. I don't math.
Depends on your altitude.
Depends on your altitude. So water will boil at around 212 degrees. But these pressure canners, we can use less water and we can heat that to above 212 degrees, which brings me to elevation. Your elevation that you're canning at will determine what pressure you need to can at.
And the length of water bath.
And water bath canning. Yeah, I was going to let you do that when you, okay. For sure. You've got to know where you're canning at. So Google search your zip code with your altitude. Ask the Google, it'll tell you. exactly what your altitude is, and then you'll know what you need to be canning at. As you go up in altitude, you go up in pressure. As you go up in altitude, you go up in time on the water bath canner. So we're sitting at under 1,000 feet here, so I'm going to can at 10 pounds of pressure. A couple things about the canner themselves for anybody that has never used this. There's a lot of safety mechanisms on this. One is the overpressurized plug here on the back. This is not like your great grandmother's canner. This is very different. So this overpressurized plug is built in, so if the canner gets under too much pressure, this plug will actually pop out, right? Yeah, you know, she's saying it for me. So this will actually pop out, and when this pops out, you need to replace it because it's rubber, and once it pops out, it never quite seats correctly in there again. So they have replacement parts if you ever pop that thing out, but that's there as a safety measure. Having said that, make sure that this is facing the back of your stove, away from you. Okay, you know where I'm going with this? Because if it's facing towards you and you just happen to be walking by, you're going to get a canning souvenir. It has an arrow on it and a little divot on the canner itself. You're going to line those two things up and you lock it into place. Now you'll see when I lock this into place, if you can see, this thing has little, what we call bayonet fingers. They're little clips, and that's going to clip underneath. That's another safety measure. So we've got our overpressurized ring, we've got our bayonet clips, and the last thing we have here on this particular brand of canner is the wing nuts. The number one reason that these canners run out of water, when somebody calls me in a panic, I ran my canner out of water, oh my gosh, what do I do? Well, there's nothing you can do once you run it out of water. You just have to hope you didn't warp it. So the number one reason why is because steam has escaped from under the lid. So the seal between the lid and the canner was not seated properly. If this is cattywampus at all, if it's off kilter, tilted, then you will start to see steam escape between the lid and the canner. Don't panic. Never panic in canning. You're in control of the canner. Just turn the fire off. Turn its juice off. Take your foot off the gas pedal, back away and reassess. So if that happens, just turn it off, let it cool down a little bit till it's 0 on the dial gauge, and then fix your lid. Even it back out. So the way that I get this right the first time, so I don't have to go back and do it again, is once I click this into place, technical errors, okay. Once I click this into place, I just kind of press on it a little bit and try to feel my way and get it kind of even. Now I'm going to pull these wing nuts up in the opposite direction of themselves, and I'm not going to tighten them all the way down, just enough to hold the lid in place. And now I'm going to get on eye level. Now when you have a stove in your regular kitchen, this is much easier, but I'm going down here. I'll see you in a minute. So I kind of get on eye level down here, and what I'm looking for is that this side of the canner and this side of the canner have even spacing. I'm looking for an even spacing all the way around. And I got it right the first time. So now I'm going to go ahead and lock these down. If it's not even spacing, if one side is lower than the other, loosen that side, tighten this one, pulls it back down again, right? So you're just looking for that even spacing all the way around. I'm going to tighten this down. You cannot strip these wing nuts. I've tried. So go ahead and screw those down. And then we're going to turn on our heat source. Now I'm going to turn on my heat source medium to high-ish. When I'm at home here, I'm going to do it very slowly because this stove is like powerful. And yesterday we almost sent it to the moon. So we're going.
She's not kidding.
Well, I didn't almost send it to the moon.
I turned it on high. I'll take the blame for that one.
I only almost set the tent on fire twice. No. I didn't know there was a manual in that thing. I also didn't know
right
there
next
was a
to the
manual
air
in
vent.
this thing, and I turned on the fires. Yeah, so I caught that one. She caught that one. We're not going to do that today, though. We're not going there. So I'm just going to turn this on a medium to low right now to get my canner started. And then I'm going to hand this over to Tammy so she can talk about the water bath canning a little bit. And as soon as this comes up to steam, you will start to see a steady stream of steam. So if you see me coming over here and I'm running my hand over the vent pipe, I'm checking for my steady stream of steam. I'm going to vent this canner. venting. It's never a good thing unless you're in the kitchen. So totally vent your canners. What you're doing is filling up the entire chamber with steam. You're pushing all the air out. And remember we talked about air in the jars and how that temperature affects the food in the jar? That happens in your canners too. So you want to push all that air out so you get even heating temperature throughout the canner. You don't want a big air pocket right in the middle of it, and then that one jar is not heating to the temperature it needs to be. So we're going to vent this for 10 minutes, but first I'm going to, if Tammy's ready, if not, I can talk all
Keep
day.
talking, keep talking.
Keep talking, keep talking. How about some audience questions? Does anybody have a question on anything we've covered so far, or possibly something that you're running across in your kitchen that we might be able to help with? Yes, ma'am. So what I find with browning meat is, like, if I'm doing ground beef and I do what's called a par cook first, meaning I remove most of the grease but not all of it, by the time I'm done with that and I drain off the grease, it's already cooled quite a bit. So if the meat is hot, jar's hot. If the meat is cold, jar's cold. You want the temperature of the food to match the temperature of the jar and the temperature of the canner. This isn't because of sterilizing. I think us generational canners were always given the word sterilize. You got to sterilize your jars. You got to sterilize your... Don't listen, Grandma.
It's called sanitizing.
I hope my grandma doesn't
sterilizing.
hear me. It's not sterilizing. You can't sterilize anything in a kitchen. It's sterile when it's in the canner. But the second you take that lid off, the second anything is exposed to your ambient air, it is now exposed to the microbes in that air. So while it's great in theory, that is a total misnomer about sterilizing your jars and your lids and your rings. What you need is hot soapy water and a little elbow grease
You're
or a
just trying to-
dishwasher, whatever.
You're just trying to sanitize them.
You're just trying to sanitize your jars. What we are trying to prevent with, like, hot food and hot jars is thermal shock. Thermal shock of your jars. That's what we're trying to prevent. So if you put a really hot product in something that is cold and it's glass, you get thermal shock, and that's when your jars start to break. And they might not break the first time or the 10th time or the 100th time, but eventually, I don't know how often you guys can, eventually the bottom of that jar goes poof and it pops off. You open the canner and you're like, I think I smell chicken. Why do I smell chicken? And then you open the canner and you're like, there's chicken in the canner because the jar broke. So that's what we're trying to prevent.
Is there any other reason that the bottom comes off of the jar?
I
I've
b-
had it happen to tomatoes.
Yeah.
Co-packet and all, and it's done.
I have had every jar breakage known to man, and I think that one is the one I see the most, is the bottom popping off.
Because when you're doing stuff and you clang it together,
Yeah.
you can create injury you haven't seen on the jar.
Hairline fractures is what we call them, or stress to the jar or stress to the glass. And that typically, remember, canning is kind of sciencey, and I try not to get too sciencey, but as that jar is building pressure, it is pushing the air and the oxygen out. So as it is pushing that out, what happens to the food? It is pushing down. The food is going down, the air is going up, and so the bottom of that jar wants to pop off.
You hear it, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, you'll hear it in the canner. Yeah. I always talk about tripping over the dog because everything I hear weird in the canner, I go running from one room to the next, and my dog thinks it's true emergency and, like, tries to run out and protect me, and I always trip on him. That's one of them. Yeah. A jar breaks, you're going to know it. Yes, ma'am.
How often do you reuse your lids? You said you use the Superbs twice. At what point do you say it's going to fail if I use it?
Perfect. Are you ready? You want me to keep going?
I'm ready, but we can answer that
I'll let
first.
Tammy answer that, and then I have probably a different answer.
I'm going to inspect my lid. I'm going to make sure that it looks like it just came out of the box. I want my rubber to still be good. I don't want any, like, some people use things to pry their lid up. I use a kitchen spoon. Sarah uses a church key. I use this is like your spoon, the cup part of your spoon. I go around and around till it engages, and then I just carefully do up with a spoon so that I keep that lip on my lid good. Meat is expensive. I don't reuse these anymore, any lid anymore for meat. because of the price of meat. But I will reuse them to water bath. I have tried to see how long. Okay, he's not back there. I'm at 4. I have to open a jar to try them again, but I've tried them 4 times. I make sure that my blue is still flexible. There is a trick to making the blue puff back up if it's too flat. You can put a little baking soda in some water and lightly simmer it for a couple minutes, and any lid will come back up, puff back up. If it puffs back up, it's good to water bath for me. That's my kitchen, my rule. If it doesn't, it goes into, I think today I'm going to store spices in this jar in bulk, and it gets an X on it, and it becomes one that I only use to store dry goods. So,
And for me, that is pretty much the same. The key to reusing lids, and we don't go into this a lot, right? Because the manufacturers don't want us to talk about this kind of stuff. I'm not talking Superb, just in general, because it's a rebel thing to do.
They haven't told me we can't talk about it. I want to be clear about that.
They told me we could talk about whatever we want.
Yeah.
So anyways, with the lids, I find that not damaging the lids and treating them with care means that you'll be able to reuse them later. So I have a junk lid in my drawer. We call it the junk lid. Everybody knows they are not allowed to open the jars without a junk lid. We take that junk lid and we put it on the jar, like so, like this. And then when I use that church key to pry open my lid, it dents and damages the top lid, and the lid that's attached to the jar remains intact. So that's how I do it. And then the junk lid goes back in the drawer. Once I take off that lid on the jar, then I inspect it. Like Tammy said, I'm looking at the seal. I'm looking at, is there a sheen to it? Does the foam, we call it the rubber, but there's not really any rubber left in these. They're all silicone and different components. But I push on that. Does it look like it's got any spring form that comes back to it? I inspect the edges. Is there rust? So is there a number time? No. It could be 10 for you. It could be 2 for me. It just depends on what your lid looks like. Is it in good shape? If I pulled this lid out, would I immediately know that it was a used lid? I would, because I'm a canner, and I can tell which lids have been used or not. But you want to inspect the lids, and then some people mark them. I don't. I just keep using a lid until it just on me. But yeah, I reuse.
I reuse them past that point.
And then when they're done with that, then they go for other things. They go on my herbs and spices, or I take my Dollar Tree skewer and I hot glue a lid on it, and then it says thyme, and it goes in the garden with the herbs.
Yeah.
I find uses for everything. I think if you're a homesteader, you probably already know. You kind of got that mindset. What can I reuse it for, and how can I make this more purposeful?
So before I start
Oh,
on...
one more question.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Aside from boiling it dry, is there any issue with overventing it? 15 minutes?
Other than boiling it dry, no. And in 15 minutes, you're not going to run it dry. It takes a long time to run it dry. But the most common run it dry is because it was tilted. And so as that steam is escaping the side, and as the steam is kind of escaping underneath the weight, if you're not visually paying attention to that, then it just looks like steam coming out of the canner. That's when it happens rather quickly. During the venting process, no. If you go over 12 minutes, 15 minutes, it's not going to run it dry. If you do a long time, like say you get an emergency phone call, or the cow's decided it's having its baby right now and it needs help, and you come back to it and you're like, oh my gosh, that's been running for 30 minutes. Turn off the fire, let it come down to pressure, let it cool, take the lid off, and reassess your water on the inside. Just double check how much steam actually escaped from it. And, oh, I thought you were handing me something. And if you need to add more water before you start it again. Yep. Is it time?
Between 2 and 2:30.
Oh, I don't have a clock. What time?
We're going to talk as long as people
I gotta
want to
tell you
listen.
the time.
Yes.
It is 1:54. We got 6 minutes.
It's a perfect time.
It's a perfect time.
Okay.
Do you know what this is? It's a number.
9, 21. Press the trigger.
See? Do you want my mic? I feel okay.
Stand in the-
I'm loud enough.
He doesn't need it.
Okay.
I'll share with you, John. You can have my mic.
I think you can hear on
Do you want me to hold it? So you
Yeah,
can hold the
sure.
name out?
Okay. Yeah. So this is for the All-American 921 pressure canner cooker giveaway. Oh, you want me to pull it?
I'm gonna hold it so you can't see.
Okay. And you have to be present
Drum
to win.
roll, please.
And yesterday I drew like 9 names. Couldn't find a winner. It was the craziest thing. Oh.
And the winner is.
The winner needs to type his handwriting.
Let me see it. It is
Mike
Sherboat.
Sherbet.
Sherbot.
Sherbert.
He's from Clayton.
From Clayton.
Mike
That's
from
my
Clayton.
husband's name. Mike from Clayton.
Schubert.
Schubert? Mike Schubert.
Mike Schubert, you are the winner of the 921 pressure cooker.
There's Mrs. Mike.
Oh, we have the wife right here. Well, I say you get it anyways, but I mean, it's not my raffle.
Yeah. You're the wife. Are you truly the wife?
Are you truly?
Okay.
Ma'am, we're going to need to see 3
It's
forms
yours.
of ID,
How many?
please.
How many years?
52
years.
Right.
Woo! That's amazing. Yes, ma'am. Oh, we also have another raffle for a gift basket from Walnut Creek. This is fun. Do I get to play? All right. Michael Helton. Michael Helton. Gift basket from Walnut Creek.
Michael Helton, are you here?
Helton in the tent? Area code 513, Michael Helton. Please come to the canning extravaganza. You have won a gift basket. You have 2 seconds. Hurry.
If you're in the back, just wave really big.
Don't you over a dog.
Yeah, don't trip over the dog.
Well, you're forcing me to run.
Wendy Parcell. Wendy Parcell. Is there a Wendy Parcell? You want a gift basket?
Is Wendy here? Wendy Parcell.
Okay, you want to try to call these two, or you want me to draw more names? All right, we're gonna try to call them.
And then we'll give away the other one for Mike.
I have another one to give away. Dang. Just get one. Rebecca Story. Rebecca Story. There's no phone number on this one. I don't know how you're gonna call it. All right, Rebecca Story, you have 64 seconds. It hasn't been 64 seconds, Leanne. You have another gift basket?
No, it had. You put your phone number on, didn't you?
Lacey Holt. Holt. Lacey Holt. You won a Layman's gift basket.
Lacey, if you're here,
I
wave
just
your
don't
hands.
understand. It's like I can't give them away.
You beat the Southern.
I can't give them away. Oh, that cliche just hit me. You're gonna do that? Yeah. My goodness. All right. Michael, is it Richer? Michael Richer? It looks like R-I-C or Reichner, R-I-C-N-E-R maybe? There's no phone number in that one either. Oh my goodness.
I'm gonna stick this on.
David, S-Y-E-R-L-Y. David Sir, you know, I'm not good at this. I have the microphone, but not for this reason.
Sarley, David Sarley.
Oh. There's a phone number in that one at least. Tammy, what can I help you with? Okay. Why don't you leave the fire to me? That's fun.
No. I can't leave the fire to you, Sarah. They did not bring us the fire extinguisher today. So, are you ready for me to start again?
Yes, ma'am.
Those got to be cooked. They haven't been done. Those are the raw. So, I forgot to tell you something because we kind of been switching back and forth. When you take your milk out, you want to make sure that you go ahead, take your ring off, and wipe your jars. Okay? The enemy of long-term storage is rust. If you have food under here, it's going to help corrode it faster. This ring is made of a different metal than this lid. If you leave your ring on, it's going to cause your lid to rust faster. You want to take them off. For the milk, 0 time. I bring it up to pressure, I turn it off, I let it set several hours. You guys all love me, you want to hang out here, but probably not for another 4 or 5 hours. So that's why I did it the way I did it, showed you how it was done, and once it's brought completely back, cool to touch, you'd let your baby put their hand on the pressure canner, then you can go ahead, open it up, and take the jars out. Okay? No. I do not do milk in quarts. I haven't had the success I have in pints. I use this milk taste. The sugars in here caramelize. It has a sweet taste. I use it primarily for cooking and baking or making hot chocolate or chocolate milk, something that you're going to want to taste sweeter anyway. It's not going to have the taste of, oh, I just grabbed that gallon, poured out of the refrigerator and poured it in. Even if you put it in the refrigerator before you open it up, it's still going to have a funny sweet taste to it. So I use this when I go camping. I like to have it like this. I don't have to worry about the milk spilling in the cooler, making my cooler smell funky for the rest of my life. So I take my jars like this camping, and I can make my pancakes. When I'm baking, a lot of my recipes like banana bread call for 2 cups of milk. So I'm already pre-measured. I know I have 2 cups of milk in here. I'm ready to go. I can use it open it up and use it for baking. That's what I do. Now, somebody asked me how long the milk will stay, because obviously it's not a tested recipe. And of course, everything they're going to say is 18 months. I'm a rebel. I'm going to push that. I am opening jars right now. I canned 6 years ago, and they still taste like the day I canned them, the one I opened that day. So right now, I'm using milk I canned 6 years ago. But again, that's going to depend on your storage conditions if you're keeping your lid from rusting. So, anybody else have any more questions about milk before we go to Cowboy Candy? Yes.
Can be done.
I can't hear you.
Same process.
I haven't done it, so I'm not going to tell you you can. Oh, yes. Yes, you can can butter.
I was like, what
I
the
have
heck
canned
are
butter.
you
You know what?
talking about? We can butter all the
Yes,
time.
my brain. I was thinking cream for a minute. Yes, you can butter. Again, it is not recommended because it is so oily. They tell you not to do it. It can cause your lid seal to fail. But yes, I do can butter. The thing with canning butter is you basically make it into ghee, which is shelf stable anyway. You take all the milk solids out of it and skim them off before you can it. And also, once you can it, while it's solidifying and cooling off, you're doing this to keep it all blended together. So yes, you can can it. It's not going to taste quite like store-bought, and you want to can unsalted butter, because when you can the butter, it intensifies the amount of salt in here. So I would not can store-bought salted butter. But yes, you can it, and it's shelf-stable that way. But ghee is shelf-stable too. The advantage of canning your own butter is when you go to the store and you buy a pint of ghee, you're going to pay $7.99 to $12 for a pint of ghee. I can go get, even right now with inflated prices, I can go get $3.99 worth of butter and fill this jar. So it's very economical to can your own butter. Okay. So let me go get
I'm
my
not ready
peppers.
yet.
We're going to do Cowboy Candy.
I'm not
now.
ready yet. It has to vent. It will when I bring it up to pressure, yeah. Yep. So about, is my mic back on? Okay. So about the butter, is my mic on? Okay. Can you hear me? I keep turning it off because I don't want anybody to hear me blowing my nose outside the tent. So about the canning of the butter, Tammy makes a lot of good points. And again, her and I do something that's a little bit different in my kitchen than her kitchen. I like my butter a little bit salty. And so I can mine half and half. So I use half unsalted and half salted. And what I end up with is a product that tastes like salted butter. But I use that primarily for my baking, and then I don't have to add salt to my recipes when I'm baking, or I use it for our popcorns. It does have a different consistency to it. Some people will say it's a little bit grainy, and that is going to depend on how much of the milk solids you have removed from the butter prior to canning. So the more milk solids you remove, the less grainy it is. But the more you remove, the more it's like ghee butter. So.
All right, so I went ahead and cut up the peppers here and kind of started, I put 2 cups of vinegar in, and I'm starting to get them cooking so it'll speed it up so you guys aren't watching for so long. I have 2 jalapeno peppers here that I didn't cut up. The one in my left hand has a lot of striation marks on it, a lot of wrinkles. I don't know if you can see that. The one in my right hand is very, very shiny. So if you think the one in my right hand is hotter, raise your right hand. If you think the one in my left hand is hotter, raise your left hand. Which pepper, just by looking at it, can you tell which one is hotter? Everybody who raised your left hand, you are correct. The ones with these are going to be hotter. So when you're picking your peppers and you want to judge your product, if you like it really hot and spicy, use more of the ugly ones. And if you like it more mild, use more of the soft, shiny ones. That's my tip. Yeah, if you want it, I left all the seeds in here. This is going to be a very hot batch of Cowboy Candy. Cowboy Candy, after it sits in the jar for 4 to 6 weeks, like any pickle, you want to let it set. You don't want to eat it fresh. It'll have a real bite when you eat it fresh. Let it mellow for 4 to 6 weeks. It's going to taste a lot better. So Cowboy Candy is like the best thing to can, because if you could have one product on your shelf that you could use to do 7 or 8 things, wouldn't that be so much better than having 7 or 8 things taking up shelf space? So Cowboy Candy, the number one use for it is an appetizer or a little snack. You put the Cowboy Candy on top of cream cheese, on top of a cracker, and serve it to your guests, and you have a cute little appetizer with a little bit of bite. Remember, milk is the antidote for the hot, so when you serve the hot peppers with cream cheese, you're kind of helping cut that bite. I know somebody that actually makes cheesecake and spreads the candied jalapenos on top of the cheesecake to make a little bit different kind of cheesecake. Instead of a fruity one, it's a spicy one. And people just love it. And again, it's being served with that milk, so it's kind of taking the bite away. Any leftover brine I have when I make this, I'm going to use that as a marinade, and I'm going to pour that over top of my meatloaf.
Thank you
or I'm
so
going to pour that over top of my roast, and I'm going to serve that use it as a marinade. I know people that use Cowboy Candy as a condiment. They put it on top of their food, especially hamburgers in the summer, and they eat it on top of their hamburgers just like they do relish. So this is so versatile. You can serve it so many different ways. A lot of people really enjoy Cowboy Candy. And you can tailor it to your spice needs. So, if you don't like jalapeno peppers, you can use green peppers, or you can mix and match some peppers. If you really like it hotter, you can take it up a notch or 2 by adding different hotter peppers. The one thing I don't do is I don't mix the colored peppers. So you could do a batch of candied jalapenos or candied peppers with all green peppers, or you can do the red and yellow together. Don't mix the red and yellow or the green, or you're gonna get this weird brown colored product. And brown is not a food color that people usually find appetizing. So even though the food inside the jar is very appetizing, the color will put off some people. So you don't want to mix the two colors of peppers.
The brine is also really good to use and have canned up on the shelves. So if I have extra brine, I put it in a pint jar by itself. I can that up to have on my shelves. I make spicy peanut brittle with that. That's a fun one at Christmas time. I do have that recipe on my blog if you want to check that out. But like Tammy said, it's got so many different uses. I use the brine to marinate my chicken or my beef or my pork or whatever. Or I put that on as a glaze. Sometimes I reduce it down, put it on as a glaze. So it's one of those products that you can use like everything in the jar in multiple different ways. So it's nice to have on your shelves.
Yes. So in here we're supposed to have about 3 pounds of peppers. I have a little bit more. So for 3 pounds of peppers, I'm going to use 2 cups of vinegar.
Do you need something?
And then 6 cups of sugar. There's where the candied part comes in. That was 2.
Tammy, what if you need to substitute the sugar?
What?
What if you need like less sugar in your diet?
You could use less.
What's that? Yeah, thank you.
I have actually experimented with using stevia.
Yes.
And it does-
and I'm a Splenda girl. Like I prefer Splenda in my candy. I just like the end product a little bit better.
I'm allergic to Splenda. I
Yeah.
can only use the all-natural products. I can't use anything chemically processed.
Which is the great thing about canning, right? You can tailor it to
Yeah.
your dietary needs. You could also use things like maple syrup and honey.
I have used
But
the
you'll
honey.
end up with more
When
liquid.
you use the honey, for every cup of honey, just like when you're making bread, you subtract a 1/4 cup from it. So if it's 6 cups of sugar, for each cup you would subtract a 1/4 cup. So it wouldn't be a full 6 cups of honey. I'd have to do the math, which I can't do right here quick in my head. But you always subtract a 1/4 cup.
Don't ask me. I am not
So
mathing
if
on
it calls
camera.
for 1 cup of honey, or 1 cup of sugar, you would put in 3/4 cup of honey. So we do 3 3/4 cups of honey. And the same with maple syrup. You would use 3 3/4 cups.
I'm starting my timer for 10 minutes because we've got a full vent here, so the steam is going, and I'm just going to start that timer for 10 minutes and let it do its thing for 10 minutes.
Awesome. So then we get into the spices. This recipe is really forgiving. So you can tailor this recipe. The spices are only in here for your taste. So you can tailor it to your family and your family's taste. It calls for 6 tablespoons of mustard seed. If you don't like mustard seed, you can add a little less. 1 teaspoon of turmeric. 1 teaspoon of celery seed. And again, these are just your pickling spices. This is basically the same recipe you would make if you were making bread and butter pickles. 3 tablespoons of garlic powder. Or if you're like me, you could add a little bit more because more garlic is always better. And then 1 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. If you don't want it so hot, you could actually leave out the cayenne pepper too if you're trying to get something more mild. 1 teaspoon. 1 teaspoon. And then I'm going to go ahead and put this on the heat. I'm going to stir it up. While I'm cooking this down and getting ready to have it ready to put in the jars to water bath, Sarah's got another recipe to do. You're not doing that yet? So I guess we're going to take some questions here while I cook this up.
Sorry, I keep turning my mic off so you don't hear me coughing back there. Yeah, go ahead. Oh yes, I reuse my brine. I will, if as long as it's not in a meat product. So if I'm just pouring it out of the jar, I will reuse it. But if I've used it as like a marinade or something like that where I've had meat in contact with it, I will not reuse it again. Every time you use it, it's going to reduce down more. So it's going to get more sugary and more sugary and more sugary. So to your taste. So the shelf life of the lids will depend on the environment that they're kept in. If you keep them in a cool, dark, dry environment, they last indefinitely. I think what you're talking about is some of the lid companies have put dates on their packaging saying 18 months freshness, and that has caused a little bit of a stir. That stuff has always been on there. That's not new news. In fact, it used to only be 12 months prior to 2016. They actually extended that freshness seal guarantee to 18 months just recently. And so the jar, people ask me, how long is that going to be good for? It's good for as long as your environment is good for. And if your environment is good, it's going to last longer. But the freshness seal that you're seeing on the boxes saying it will stay fresh for 18 months, what that company is really telling you is that they have product tested that, and they know that their seals will last in good conditions for about 18 months before the seal starts to break. That's their guarantee to you. That's what they're telling you their product can do. So with things like the Superb canning lids, which are the new lids, there's no date on there. If you look anywhere on the boxes or their information on their website, there's no date. And the reason is they're aiming much higher than anything we've ever seen. They're aiming into the years, 3, 5, 10 years. They want to see how long these seals are going to last. So they're doing accelerated testing in the factories to test those dates. And they're not going to put a date on that box until they know for sure how far out in the future that seal is going to stay. Yeah. I've never seen an expiration date on a box of lids. I mean, that is an inanimate object. That would be like saying this is going to expire in 2 years. So unless you keep it in a condition where the lids, again, are exposed to very high temperatures or very freezing temperatures, and you're keeping them in an environment where they can rust, things like that, then yeah, they're going to have an expiration date. They're only going to survive the environment that they're in. In your house? Yeah. Yeah, you definitely can. And some people do, especially people that live in like Florida or high humidity climates. They'll put a dehumidifier in the room that they're storing the cans in, or the jars. These lids do not have an issue with rusting, not that I have found and not that they have tested in their product testing. And the reason is, again, I go back to I don't want to name other companies, but the other company, the other main company, I believe they dip their lids maybe like once or twice, and these have like a triple coat on them. So if you've ever opened a jar of food and you look on the underneath and it has those like black spots and it almost looks like mold, but it's not mold, and it doesn't, I still don't understand. There's a note for me? Oh. The black stuff on the inside. Depending on the coating of the lid will depend on how easily it oxidizes or how easily the two metals of the canner, because your canner is aluminum, the lids are a different type of metal, the rings may be a different kind of metal, so when you start mixing all those metals, sometimes they react to each other, and we're finding with the new Superb lids that is not happening because of the extra coating on them.
So if you want to see this presentation or yesterday's presentation, it is available on the Superb Canning website, on YouTube, their channel, and it's live streaming actually right now. for us. So it'll be available, and it's also available right now live stream.
Okay, so I have 30 seconds left, so I'm just going to shut the timer off so it doesn't interrupt me. What I've done now is I have filled up that canner with all of the steam, and I'm going to put on the weight. Now these weights are calibrated. So this weight for this particular make and model, it has the 5, the 10, and the 15 on it. If you have a different type of model, you may have a different type of weight. You may have a 3-piece weight system that has 5, 10, and 15 are all different. You may have the stacking system that has the rings. If you have a very old canner, you'll have a petcock where you have to do it manually, but we're only talking about this one right now. So this is 5, 10, and 15 pounds. New canners will often ask me, why do I smell something burning? Oh, it's that stinky feet recipe. When you make this recipe, it stinks. That's my opinion. Tammy says it smells great. I think it stinks. It's the apple cider vinegar. These don't weigh 10 pounds. They create 10 pounds of pressure. So people will ask me, they're like, there's no way you're lifting that tiny little thing with your fingers with 10 pounds. It doesn't weigh 10 pounds. It creates 10 pounds of pressure. So if you're at a higher elevation, you'll can at 15. If you're 1,000 feet or under, you'll can at 10. We're at 1,000 feet or under, so I'm going to choose the 10 on here, and there is a little hole on that, and that is going to go onto the vent pipe. Now, people are often afraid of this. Okay, this is hot. There's no doubt about it. You don't want to hold your hand over it, but you can check it at, away from the vent pipe. It's not going to hurt you. Same thing with this. You don't want to linger, but you do want to just get it on there in a reasonable amount of time. Now I am going to turn down this fire a little bit. Again, this is not my stove, and I've had to kind of play around with this, trying to find that sweet spot. But when I'm at home, I know exactly where my stove needs to be because I know how it speaks to my canner. With this vent pipe on, or with the weight on now, this is also known as a jiggler. You might hear it called a jiggler. With the weight on now, what is happening is I have blocked the steam from coming out. So like with locomotives and anything that is steam powered, what happens when you block steam? You create pressure, you create energy. So that's what I'm doing right now. I've pushed all the air out. I'm going to fill up this whole chamber with steam. That's going to start to create my pressure. And my dial gauge is already starting to rise. I'm already at 5 pounds of pressure. I'm going to wait till this gets to 10 pounds of pressure, and that's when I can start my timer. Not until then, because I want to make sure that I've met all the parameters. I need to have the correct pressure, and I need to have the correct temperature, and then I can start the timer. For pints, it's meat times. Did you write that down earlier? Meat times are 75 minutes pints, 90 minutes quarts. So I have pints in here. I'll start that for 75 minutes in just a minute. Hello, official photographer. How are you?
We don't need an entrance. So
Yeah, give a round of applause for the official photographer. He's going to have all the stuff for you later to watch, to look at. So we are at 5.5 pounds of pressure. The time that it takes to go up to pressure will depend on your elevation. So the higher up you are, sometimes the longer it takes to go up. The lower the elevation, it could shoot up very quickly. Also, there's going to be a sweet spot on your stove itself, and only you are going to know where that sweet spot is. I could put my canner on my front right burner, which is my favorite one, and I know
We all have
We
a
all
favorite
have the front-
burner.
yeah.
You admit it. You have a favorite burner,
we all
don't
have a
you?
favorite burner. I know exactly what my canners will do on that front burner, but if I move my canner to the burner next to it, it's a totally different set of parameters. The 5 no longer works. I've got to turn it up to 6 because that burner is 1 inch shorter than my big burner. So your canner and your stove will have a relationship, which is why when I come to an event like this and they're like, can you can live? I get nervous, okay? It's not because I don't know what I'm talking about or I haven't done this 100 times. It's because I'm canning on a stove with a canner and I have never listened to the conversation between those two. So I'm listening and I'm constantly adjusting. And when you start off canning, you're going to do the same. You're going to do the same. You're going to hover over your stove and be like, ah, that's okay. It happens. You are going to learn the relationship between those two things and you're going to have it down and it's going to become simple. It's going to become like second nature.
And then we talked about the weight yesterday. We didn't talk about it today. There's different kinds of weights. I absolutely love the 3-in-1 like we have today. There's also the Jiggler. And I love the Jiggler for the reason that I can walk out into the other room and I can hear that jiggler, and I know if it's going at the right rate. I was raised in the South when I was younger, so this is my analogy for people always ask, how do I know if my jiggler is at the right rate? Well, if you've ever seen a rattlesnake up close and it starts hissing at you and tells you that it's there, that's about the right rate. If you've ever been about to step on one and it starts hissing and rattling, it's rattled faster, and you know that you are in imminent danger, that is too fast. So you want it just a slow rock. You don't want it a, I'm about to bite you rock. And that's how I think of it in my mind.
So speaking of weights, I did bring a couple from my house, just so you could see the different kinds. This is what's called a dead weight. This comes on the Presto. The reason we call it a dead weight is you can't change anything about this. It's 15 pounds no matter what. These weights are designed to jiggle when the canner achieves pressure and then slightly over. So if I'm canning at a 10-pound weight, I don't get a jiggle until about 10.5 to 11 pounds. And that's because the weight is auto-regulating and it's letting off a little bit of steam as it builds pressure. It lets that steam off, the pressure falls, and then it builds it back up again. So it doesn't jiggle again until it needs to. It's self-regulating. These 15-pound weights are dead. That just means you can only can at 15 pounds. You only get a jiggle when you've achieved 15 pounds or over. Can you use this and still can at 10 pounds pressure? Yep, sure can. But you're going to rely more heavily on your dial gauge. You're going to rely more heavily on that because you're not going to get an audible jiggle. So these are not my favorite. I don't like these. I have about 5 of them, and they all go in the drawer together. I don't know why I keep them. I'm never going to use them, but they're in there just in case. The other type of weight system that Tammy was talking about was like these 3-piece weights. These are game-changing. If you have a canner that is not an All-American, it comes with these dead weights. These 3-piece weight systems are game-changing. So they have these rings on them, kind of like how you would use interchangeable barbells to lift more weights, and you just keep adding weights to it. Same thing. Let me struggle on camera because that's always fun. Okay, 5-pound weight is with no rings. You add a ring to it, and you've now created a 10-pound weight. This gives you more flexibility to can at 10 pounds. And then if you need to add another weight, you add a 5-pound weight to that, and it becomes 15 pounds. The reason this is game-changing is because now you can get that audible jiggle, which we're about to get on this canner right now. I can hear it coming up to pressure. I don't even have to look at the dial gauge. I know we're getting ready to get a spin. When you're using these types of weights on a Presto, what you're looking for is a slow rocking hula hoop, and it will be consistent. It will be going the whole time. The All-American is a little more self-regulating. You're only going to get a spin. The weight is going to spin or it's going to jiggle about once every 30 to 45 seconds, and that spin is going to be relatively quick. It's only going to take about 10 to 15 seconds for it to kind of rotate and let off some pressure. So again, you're going to have different makes and models. They're going to do slightly different things. When you're just starting out, make sure you're reading those manuals so you understand what your canner's doing. So, pressure gauge checking can be done at your local extension offices. Are you going to give the same answer as me?
No, I have something else I want to talk about, but I'm waiting for you to be done.
Oh, the weight. Your local extension offices, some states only have like 1 or 2 and they're kind of far apart, and then some states have a lot. Because it's an agricultural program, it's usually run through the colleges. The other way to do it, and the way I do it, I buy a new dial gauge. It's just easier for me. I just get online, I buy a new dial gauge about every 2 years, and I just replace the dial gauge. I don't have time to be dragging my stuff around town and making appointments, so. Yes, the new ones have been tested. The new ones in the box have been tested for you already, so they're good to go for a year or 2. Unless you drop that lid and damage that dial gauge in any way, the one that you get brand new out of the box is ready to go.
Going back,
to the weights.
weight that she has on the canner right now, that is the one I like. Because I have teenage boys and I make them help me with the dishes, these pieces right here get lost. They can't find them. They don't remember where they put them. You're struggling to find them. If you're going to use this kind of one, get a second one because you're going to need it sooner or later. That's why I like it, the one that has the 5, the 10, and the 15 right on it, because I don't lose that one. It's all one piece.
Okay, so I have achieved pressure, and I hope you can hear this. It's only spinning every, I don't know, minute or so. It goes off for a couple seconds. It stops. I'm finally getting a little sweet spot here. This is like driving a car. You're in control of it. So if you need more pressure, you turn the fire up. You need less pressure, down. And you're going to regulate that. So you're in control of this. I was going to talk about siphoning real quick, because siphoning is something that we deal a lot with in canning. You can't rush canning. You can try, but you really can't rush canning. So when this canner is done, I just set the timer for 75 minutes because I've achieved pressure and maintained it, meaning I'm in a good sweet spot. When this is done, I use something called the 10-10 rule. I let the canner completely cool down. I let the dial gauge fall to 0, and I don't touch it. I just turn off the fire, let it cool down, let the dial gauge go to 0. And then after that, I take the weight off and I wait 10 minutes. And then I unlock the lid and I leave the lid on. I just leave it unlocked and I wait 10 minutes. And then I kind of take the lid off and I just prop it up and let the rest of the steam come out. 10 minutes. That's my 10-10-10 rule. What I've done is I've controlled the depressurization and I've controlled the cool down. I know it's the end of the night and we're all tired. After a day of canning, if you're a canner, you know. It's like 10 o'clock at night, you just want to be done. You want the canner to depressurize, you want to get to bed. I get it. But if, whoop-a! But if you rush that process, what you're doing is you're slapping the jars in the face and you're saying, good luck, I hope you work. You need to control that. That's glass and that's metal. You want a good seal. If you cause the cool down too quickly, what's going to happen to the inside of jars that are under pressure? What happens when something's under pressure? Yeah, they're going to pop off. Your lids are probably going to pop off, or the contents of the jar are going to come out, and then you're not going to get a good seal. They're not going to want to seal properly because there's going to be food on the lid. And so we want to control that process. And that 10-10-10 will really help you with that. Control the depressurization. 10-10-10. 10 minutes, take the weight off, wait 10 minutes. Unlock the lid, wait 10 minutes. And then I prop the lid and kind of wait 10 minutes. And I'm bringing that down from 250 degrees inside the canner a lot slower and a lot more controlled, instead of just whipping off the lid and being like, well, it's 72 degrees in here. You know, it's still 240 degrees inside that canner. So that's a big temperature switch. You got a question? Oh, I'm sorry. So I used this stove for the first time yesterday with a new canner, new stove. And what I did was very small increments. So when I'm at home and I want to start venting and building steam, I'll just crank that sucker all the way up to high. We did that yesterday. That thing was like spinning and going crazy. Like it was very, very hot. The stove is very hot. So today when I came in, I was like, we're just going to start off low. And we're just going to build up in increments, build up in increments. Then I got my steam going, so I turned it down just slightly. It's just, there's a little bit of an art to it. You can't rush it. You just got to up and down and up and down. And once you find that sweet spot, some people even take like a magic erase marker or a piece of masking tape and they mark it on their stove so they know. But after 1 or 2 times, you're going to know right where that sweet spot is. Also, as you're learning how to can, the audible sounds, you know, you guys have kids and they're like, mom, 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 dad, 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 dad. And you just kind of tune it out. But if they scream, mom, like they're hurt, you know the difference. It's the same thing with your canner. I can sit here and talk to you and I'm not paying attention to this. I can tell this is running at about 12 or 13 right now because the amount of jiggles that I'm getting out. Tammy, check me. What am I at? I'm over 10. I'm at 12. And I know that because I know how my canner talks to me, and you'll learn that. And so you'll be able to hear it, and you'll be able to hear, well, that's jiggling really hard and violently, and you'll turn it down. Or you'll hear it, when I'm running 2 canners, sometimes it's a little more difficult because it's like the kids are arguing now. So sometimes I have to check it more often. But I'll be able to tell that because I can hear it from the other room. Like, you know, it sounds like that one canner's getting kind of silent. And I go over there and I check and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to turn that one up just slightly. There's also things that will affect that. If you have your fan on in your kitchen, or if your air conditioning kicks on, or if you have a window open and a big cool breeze comes through. And so that's really why you need to stay within an earshot, because this is going to be constant auto-tuning. Not constant, but it happens. You're welcome. Tammy, is your Cowboy Candy?
Quite, yeah. We can take a few more questions.
Okay, a few more questions. If anybody has any.
About 20 minutes to cook in the brine, because if you try to pack it in the jars too soon, you'll wind up with about half of the things, because they're going to shrink when they cook down. So you want it pretty well cooked down before you try to pack it in the jar so that you get a full jar of product. This is something I do quite often in jelly jars and half pints, but we have pints today, and we must really like Cowboy Candy to use the pints in it. At my house, we really like Cowboy Candy, but when I give them away, I like to do it in small jars.
Yes, ma'am. Slightly louder, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Did you pressure can it? It's fine. Yeah, you're fine. There is this thing in the canning community. Yeah, go ahead.
So
Sorry.
the thing about the citric acid in the tomatoes, I don't know what kind of tomatoes you used. Okay, but Romas are a canning brand of tomato. If you went out and you bought the yellow pear tomato that is low acid, that isn't eating a slicer, or a little salad tomato, and you go to can that, it's not going to have the same acid as your big boy, your big girl, your Romas, your San Marinos, just because that's the way it's been bred and developed over years. People don't like a high acid tomato in their salad. The people who are checking these products and testing them, they don't know if you used big boy or if you used pear. And so they have to make a blanket statement that will cover every single tomato out there. So because I'm using a canning type tomato, I'm using my kitchen, my rule judgment. I probably won't add as much, or I won't add, depending on the taste, the citric acid. And, you know, but if I were using pear tomatoes, I'm going to be sure I add that citric acid. Sorry, Sarah.
No, you're fine. And I'm under the rule of thumb, ain't nothing surviving that. So, again, there's this thing in the canning community that tomatoes are kind of a sensitive subject for us, I think, because they fall, I don't know if you saw my chart this morning. I had the high acid and the low acid foods. Those tomatoes fall right in the middle of that chart. And so they're like one of those border foods. Do I add the citric acid and lemon juice? Don't I? And the canning books will tell you, based on a blanket statement, like Tammy said, they don't know what kind of tomatoes you're using. But in the pressure canner, we're achieving temperatures of 240 degrees or above. That's not water boiling. So if it's in a water bath canner and it tells me to add citric acid or apple cider vinegar, I add those things because I'm trying to raise the acidity of the tomatoes for the water bath canner. In the pressure canner, I don't care, not at all, because you know what? The onions and the peppers and stuff that you added to it is even a lower acid than the tomatoes. So that's why we pressure can those foods, to make them safe. So you're okay, you're fine. Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm so sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, sure can. Sure can. So Tammy uses primarily a Presto, yeah?
Yeah, for me it's
I'll let her do Presto.
For me it's price point. The Presto is the lower price point, so I've always used the Presto. So that's what I'm used to. And by Presto, I mean Presto, Mural, Sears. They're all made by Presto. They just have a different brand name on them, but they're all the same company. They're all made by the same company, and a lot of the parts are all interchangeable. The thing I don't like about my Presto is it has a rubber gasket that I have to replace about every 10 to 15 years. a little bit less if I don't use it as much. Now that I'm canning as much as I am, I've actually had to replace another one. So, at least once, maybe twice in your lifetime, you're going to have to replace that rubber gasket. If you don't store it right, if you don't take care of it, if you don't, keep it the way it should, if you let it get stretched out, if you don't clean it when you take it apart. So for that reason, I'm switching over to the All-American myself because it doesn't have a gasket. I like the peacock instead of the weight, and the All-American offers the peacock instead of the weight. So what about you, Sarah? What about you?
Okay,
A peacock goes on where the weight does. It allows it to vent. When you're done venting, you turn it down like a little L. Petcock?
Yeah, it's a petcock. So your older canners they have a petcock. It's like it's like a little valve, and what that valve does is it allows you to regulate the pressure inside the canner manually. It's actually, I think they're really cool. They're really, really cool, but you can't get your hands on them unless you have an older canner. So you went over the Presto?
Yes.
Okay, so
Presto Miro NCs.
the pros and cons of the two, and I own both. The pros of an All-American versus a Presto is this is a cry once and done. So if this is high on your budget for you, this is one of those investments that you make that you can put in your will to your children. These are passed down through the generations, and you can run them over with a tank. I'm no joke. They are super well made. The difference is how they are made. The Presto is a sheet of metal, and that sheet of metal is then folded up into the shape of the Presto. These are poured metal. So there is a cast or a mold where the metal is melted and then poured into that. And what that creates is its own product. If you drop a Presto, it is much more likely to get dinged up or scratched or damaged. If I drop this, I'm just going to break my toe. That's the difference in the two. It's not going to hurt that thing. And so that's the main differences in how they are actually fabricated and how they are made. Yep. Yeah. Yes. So the metals are the same. They're all aluminum, but the difference in that is the thickness and the difference between a sheet of metal and a mold of poured metal. So this thing has much thicker walls, much heavier. And so it's not susceptible to pitting and corrosion as much as the Prestos are. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, these are a little bit thicker and they hold up better. They also have a longer lip on them, so they don't bend as much. I don't know how old your Presto is, but if you have an older one, sometimes those metal plates start to kind of bend and buckle, so they're thicker. Also, when you buy these, you get 2 shelves. So it comes out of the box with 2 shelves. With Presto, if you want a double stack in the Presto, you have to get a second shelf. Also with the Presto, most of them come with the dead weight. So if you want that 3-piece weight system, another thing. Also with the Presto, it has a gasket rubber seal, and that rubber seal has to be replaced every now and again. With this, there's the shelf. You're not going to worry about replacement parts with this. I mean, unless you drop it or damage something on it where it has to be replaced. This is a metal-to-metal seal on this lid. It creates a much more intense seal and it's much better. It's self-regulating as far as pressure goes. But the Presto, if that is what is in your budget and helps you get your food on the shelves, use what you have. Yep.
What do you have to do when you first use one?
Yeah, when you first get it, she's nudging me over here. You forgot something. You need to oil these. So you will take a virgin olive oil, or there's a list of approved oils in the manual, and you'll oil up the rim of that. If this ever gets stuck, because sometimes they do, they suction plate together under pressure, The book will tell you can stick the back of a spoon under there and pop it up, or even like a screwdriver or a butter knife and kind of pop that up, and that's okay. They know that that's part of what this product does because it's that metal to metal seal. You had to do that. Yeah. Did you call me on that one? I don't even remember. Somebody called me not too long ago, like, my lid is stuck. I'm like, it's okay. Yeah, to just go. Yeah. And then after something like that happens, I suggest re-oiling the lid again.
Sarah, just a minute. So
Ooh, another raffle.
we have drawn again for a gift basket. Lynn Rapp. Lynn Rapp, are you in the tent? Lynn Rapp. Lynn Rapp, if you're here, come to the tent. You have a few minutes, and then we're going to draw another name. Lynn Rapp. Maggie Arnold. Maggie Arnold, are you here?
Woohoo! Congratulations.
Congratulations, Maggie.
So he asked what about the different sizes? Was there something specific you were looking for? Yeah. I have this one, the 921. This is the most common size and the easiest one to get your hands on because they have dedicated production lines for these. But they come in a varying range of sizes, even company to company. So Presto has a smaller one, like a 16 quart and a 23 quart. The All-American has a, I'm going to misspeak on this, but it's a smaller one, a 910, 921, 931. It goes up in size. I get one less pint jar in my All-American than my Presto, only if I'm using the wide mouths. If I'm using regular mouth jars, I get the same amount in both. But if I use the wide mouth, it takes up just that little bit more. And the difference of that is, again, the metal. So in my Presto, the metal's thinner, so I have a little bit more real estate on the inside, where this metal is much thicker, so I lose a little bit of real estate. So I get 2 stoves going usually, with 4 canners, but it depends on what I'm bringing in. So if I'm doing like I just did corn, and it was 7 dozen corn, and so it took up 2 inside and 1 outside. So when I'm working outside, I have a Camp Chef propane grill. I just use that. I can't fit 3 on my stove and have the burner in the middle of the canner like it needs to be. And so I can fit it on there, but it's like I'm only heating half of the bottom of the canner, and you don't want that. You want even heat. So I move that 3rd one or 4th one to the outside. And it also depends on what I'm doing. When I lived back home before I moved away from my friends and my family, canning was a thing. So, if my family needed to come over and we were all doing tomatoes at the same time or all doing corn at the same time or whatever, we could set up as many canners as we have stove space for. So you can run them all. I have seen and I have been to canning parties where entire garages are set up. Tammy, right? We've got multiple timers going and everybody's, having a few drinks, and you're like, which timer? Like, put that timer in front of that canner because you're just,
We have another drawing. Mendy. Mendy, if you are here, you have won a gift basket. Mendy. If you're in the tent, raise your hand. Mendy. Yeah. We're going to give Mendy a call.
921. Yeah, it's called a 921, All-American 921. If you want more information about All-American and their website and the deals they're running and everything and all their new products coming out, their tent is directly across from us here. So I would stop by there and grab a brochure too. They're what I call a cry one and done. Meaning you just cry once because it hurts just a little bit. But once you have it, and it lasts forever. So.
And when she says forever, my daughter Rebecca is canning on her grandmother's canner that was purchased in 1930-something,
Yeah.
It says from the stamp on the bottom of it. So, she really does mean they get passed down for generations, and they're very easy to use. And if for some reason something goes wrong, they're still making all the parts and you can replace them the same on that old one as the one we have here today.
And the other thing I really like is that is a family-owned and run business and operation, and it has been for over 100 years. So
And
it's
where
if
are
you
they-
call and you need to speak to somebody, if you're having an issue with your canner, you're going to probably get one of these guys on the phone that are sitting right here at these booths. And they're going to walk you through, and they're going to, you know, help you out with your canner problem. You don't have anybody to call if your Presto goes bad. Those are made across seas. The customer service is going to be exactly what it is, and so you don't get that personal interaction and help when you need it. So that's another kind of pro-con for me. We got some Cowboy Candy to can up.
I'm ready to jar up some Cowboy Candy. I'm going to try to turn this. We got some real tall pots. You can see they're no longer the dark green and shiny. They've turned kind of a yellow color. They've been cooked down quite a bit. Go ahead and see that. So it is now ready to go ahead and get into jars. Because this is hot, my water is already in there hot and boiling. I should be using hot jars, but these are pretty warm. It's not too bad today. It's not like I took them out of a cold storage room. They're pretty good. But at home, I would probably even have these sitting in hot water ready to go. I just didn't have the forethought to do that for you today. I'm going to be smart and use my funnel. At home, I have my grandmother's funnel. It's a little bit different. This one is really nice. It has the graduated measurements on it. And again, I don't want to get so much of the liquid in here as I want to be getting a lot of the peppers, and I want to be pressing down the peppers. Because they're going to shrink even more when I water bath can them than they have already. And they are really strong today. This is going to be a hot batch. And that jar is a little bit too full. And I don't have a good spoon here to take it back out, so I'm just going to take a few out with my jar debubbler. I just want about a 1/4 inch of headspace for this. And if I get more juice in a jar, I don't really care because, like I said, a lot of these are going to go over top of my roast. This brine is incredibly sticky because of the 6 cups of sugar. So I want to be really careful not to get anything on the rim of my jar as I can. And then I'm going to go ahead and use the vinegar, like Sarah showed you earlier, to clean my jar. That sugar is really sticky, really syrupy, and it could cause my jar seal to fail if I left it on the rim of my jar.
This recipe, oh, am I on? Yeah. This recipe is very strong to the senses. Just so
yeah.
you guys know, do not be shocked. My youngest will run up from the downstairs and be like, "Ma, the dirty feet." That's what he calls it. Thank you. It's just the apple cider vinegar with the turmeric and the, you know, all the spices. It's just very strong. And your water bath canner, I don't know how much you guys know, but it's a lot heavier in my opinion and clunky. I will do anything and everything not to water bath can. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but it's like if I can stick it in the pressure canner, it's going in the pressure canner. The pressure canners. What's that?
I said I'm older, I love to water bath.
She loves to water bath.
See, she's young, she doesn't need that facial, but I love the steam facial. It makes my skin, you know, look so much better and glow after a day in the kitchen.
We figured this out yesterday. We're like 12 years apart.
I'm still older.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. So I will do anything not to water bath can because it takes so much water. The jars are heavy. The water bath canner is heavy. I'm old and my back hurts, so I don't want to do it. So your pressure canners will double as a water bath canner.
She makes somebody else dump hers.
Oh, see? She makes somebody else dump hers. That's her daughter ratting
You know,
her out right
that's what
behind
you
her.
have kids for, right? To do those jobs you don't want to do anymore when you get to be my age. It's part of teaching them. This is what you have to do, honey. I'm teaching you, now you do it. I do.
When this pressure canner is done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the heat and leave it. Now, depending on your temperature in your house and the humidity in the house will depend on how long it takes to come down to 0. Once that's down to 0, then you can safely remove your weight and you can start unlocking the lid. What you don't want to do is what we call quick release. Pressure canning is a little different than pressure cooking. In pressure cooking, a lot of times we do quick release. We may even, if you're old school like me, I take my pressure cooker, I put it under the cold water or the lukewarm water under the sink, and it releases really quick. You don't want to do that in pressure canning because you've got pressure inside the jars.
You can do a quarter.
No, you're fine, you're fine.
Yeah. Just be careful.
As soon
'cause
as
it's
Tammy
really
gets
potent.
this
It's making
into
my
the
eyes
water bath
water.
canner, we're going to take a short 15, 20-minute break so you
No.
guys can stretch your legs, get something to drink if you want. And then we're going to come back and I'm going to pressure can and show you the recipe for my beef carnitas. Or you can make a chicken carnita or beef, pork, whatever you want. But we're going to make carnitas next. From the cow that they butchered just for the show. Thank you, Bessie. Oh my gosh. Everybody's like, who's getting those jars of food? The beef carnitas. Yeah, see? Yes,
Dibs. We call dibs.
absolutely. Absolutely not. So, kind of, sort of. So, a pressure cooker and a pressure canner are two different things. A pressure canner, you'll always be able to pressure cook in. Always. The canners double as water bath canners, they double as pressure cookers, they double as everything. But the other direction around doesn't always work. So if you have a pressure cooker and it's smaller than 16 quarts, it's not going to achieve the correct temperature and pressure to be deemed safe enough to can in. The exception to that rule is if you have a very large pressure cooker. So you always want to read your manuals. I always refer people back to their manuals because there's so many makes and models. I can't sit here and make a blanket statement and be like, yeah, it's cool, go ahead and do it. And then you come back and you're like, you know, so
My
always check your
manual
manual.
said.
It's the same thing with the Instant Pots. The Instant Pots, I get a lot of questions on that. Can I can in my Instant Pot? And they'll say, well, it has a canning feature on it. Well, what make and model do you have, and what did the book say? Sometimes the book will tell you can water bath can in them, but it has nothing on pressure canning. And right now, the only one that we know of is the extra large model.
The
that
Power Pressure XL.
Power Pressure XL. And they'll probably change that name in 6 months, so you might want to write that down. It's the biggest Instant Pot. And then Presto makes an electric pressure canner specific to pressure canning. So there's that one. But they are small batches, so you can't get a lot of jars in them. They're for small batch canning, which is really great if you just have some leftovers or you have a small family. Or, you know, like my mother, she loves hers. She doesn't want to lift the canners, and she doesn't want to
It can only
have
do
too many jars.
It can only do 4 pints. So when
Yeah.
she means small, she means
Small.
small.
Small batch canning, but they're good for that. They're good for that, especially if you have like limited mobility, right? And you can't move the big canners or a lot of water. They work well for that. Tammy, is there anything I can do to help? Yep. Tammy will tell you the shelf life of hers is like 6 years. She's got some on her shelves that she's using. I find right at around a year, my family can tell if I've snuck the canned milk into the gallon. But it depends on how sensitive your palate is to milk. Some people are very milk sensitive and they can tell right away if something is skim, right? So you have that one person in your family, they're like, did you guys skim milk today? You know, like, where's our vitamin D whole fat milk? So if you're very sensitive to the texture of milk, you may start to notice a difference. It doesn't mean that it's unsafe to use. You just might, tasting-wise. For stuff like that, anything over a year, milk-wise on my shelves, I use for baking. And that's just because my family prefers a year or less. We also only can it in the pints. And I think Tammy mentioned that earlier. She likes hers in the pints. In the quart jars, it does change consistency and taste considerably more. And so the pints we use for drinking. Are you using pasteurized milk?
You're actually, I need a drink. Somebody took my water.
Just don't drink the vinegar. I almost did that earlier. The bottles were very similar.
Yeah. You're actually pasteurizing it in the canner, so you can use raw milk, but be sure to skim your cream off, make your butter, because it really, the richness intensifies when you can it. You almost get a product that's more like evaporated milk or condensed milk, not without the sweet. Those jalapenos are hot today.
You're not going to catch me trying them.
So
That recipe that she's making right there,
I know.
we don't touch that for 4 to 6 weeks minimum, and at the 1 year mark is the sweet spot for me. So I rotate those in my pantry, and I pull out the jars that are a year old, and those are the ones that I give to people, and I'm like, listen, Linda, I know the date on that says I did that last summer, but trust me when I say that's the good jar. That's the good jar, because the longer they sit, the sweeter they get.
It just mellows and it takes that bite out, so you don't get the bite from the jalapeno, but you get the flavor of the jalapeno, which is what my family prefers.
Flavor over hot.
We talked about it yesterday, and you just touched on it. Kind of made me think of it. I can on a 2-year rotation. When plants grow, you have one abundant year, and then you have one not so abundant year. You may not even get a crop that year. Most plants produce, even though they produce every year, their abundance is on a biennial cycle.
Yeah.
Now, we live up in northern Michigan. If in northern Michigan I get a frost, I'm not going to get any peaches that year. So I like to have 2 years ahead, because if I get a frost on that abundant year, I don't have any peaches left in my pantry if I haven't canned out a 2-year supply to it. So I'm always canning. I'm putting the oldest in the back, and I'm keeping a 2-year rotation of the things my family actually uses. And I think you touched on this a lot yesterday, Sarah, not so much today. Don't can things you're not going to eat. You know, I canned a whole batch of tomato jam, and come to find out, I really hate tomato jam. I don't like sweet tomato-y, syrupy stuff. And what am I going to do? I've tried to recycle it. I've tried to dump it in my spaghetti sauce, and my family is like, oh no, I can taste something in there. You got some cloves or something in there, Mom. We're not taking it. So make sure that when you're canning, like Sarah said, try a small batch first, or try somebody else's first, and then can the things you really like and keep them rotating.
Can what you eat what you can.
This is really, really sticky, syrupy, and so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wipe these down with vinegar before I put my lids on, and that'll just help keep things from getting underneath the lid and preventing it from sealing well.
Yeah, so there's many options of things that you can can on. I started off on a natural gas stove, and then I moved to a glass top stove, electric, and now I am on a propane burner stove, and I use a Camp Chef stove. So it's very possible to do this on multiple platforms. The only one that's different is the new induction cookers. If you have an induction stove, it needs to have a special bottom on it, on the canner, because the magnets won't attach and it won't heat properly. But I get this question a lot. Can I can on a glass top stove? Can I can on electric?
I even can over an open campfire in the summer when I go camping. Both water bath and pressure canner, but you got to be really good at regulating your wood and having a good bed of coals and having a spot you can move it over and back from. But you can yes.
We call it a flame tamer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can on a turkey fryer, but you have to go to your propane company and get a regulator, because if you look at the manual for any of your canners, you have to have it regulated to keep those BTUs down. So people sometimes try to use turkey canners to fry, and that BTU is so hot it will warp your canner. So if you do try to use something like a turkey fryer, you need to have a special regulator. It's only like about $10, and you go to the propane company and you tell them what you want, and they'll sell you one.
Sometimes the camping
The
stores have
grill,
them.
we've canned on this grill today with cooking the, we could have water bath, but it's a lot faster in here. If you have a burner on your grill, you can cook outside on the burner, the gas burner on your grill. That works really well too. I've done that. I have a Campmore stove that I set up outside and can outside, so I keep the heat out of my house in the summer.
There's a reason you went to propane versus natural gas.
I keep moving all over the country. Yeah, no, it's just a matter of switching houses. So what I was going to say about the glass top is I hear a lot, can I can on a glass top stove or an electric stove? Yes, you can, but there's a few things you need to do as extra precautions so you don't destroy your stove. One is read the manual on the stove. If you don't have that anymore, you just bought a house and there's no manual to be found, see if you can locate a serial number or make and model of your stove. Google owns the world, and you can pretty much find a PDF file of your manual. And what you're looking for on that manual is any kind of weight limits. Now, my glass stove, it could not handle 2 canners because it was going to be over on the weight limit. I also didn't have a burner size that was appropriate. I had 1 large burner and the other 3 were like very small. So, is that me? I'm so sorry. So I was only able to do 1 canner at a time. If you're canning on a glass top stove, weight is going to be important. Make sure you check the weight. The second thing is never slide the canner on the glass. Never slide it across. Never fill it all up and then be like, oh, I need to change burners, and slide it. You want to pick it up, lift it, and move it, because you're going to scratch the glass and eventually damage it. And then the last thing is, I'm sorry, am I over on time or something? Okay. When I get a signal, I'm like, what did I do? What did I do? Okay. The third thing is never place anything hot on a cold glass top. And if you've cooked on glass top, they'll tell you that. It's the same thing with the canner. If you have a very hot canner, leave it where it's at and let it cool on the stove on that burner. Let the cannery and the burner come down in temperature together. Don't lift that up and then decide you're going to put it on a cold burner because you need that burner to make something else. Because in essence, you're going to temperature shock the cool glass, and it's going to break. Eventually, it's going to break. Maybe not the first time, but the 10th time, whatever, it's going to break. So with some precautions, you can.
Also on that stove, you need to make sure that even if you're water bathing, some of them have the ridges underneath your
Yep.
pan. You need a flat pan on a glass top stove, or you need a flat bottom canner. So if you have the canner that has the rim or the ridge underneath there, it's not completely flat, you don't want to use that on a glass stove. And always check with your glass stove. I didn't like mine because the canner didn't fit underneath my range hood.
Yeah, your hood. How heavy does it get? So your canners will have specs in the manual to tell you how heavy they are. And then you're going to add 3 quarts of water, which the ounces are on the quarts. And then you got to guess how much you're going to do.
That's about 6 pounds.
Yeah.
A gallon of water is 8 pounds. So if you're doing 3 quarts, you're somewhere in the 6 to 7 pound range.
My stove was it had such a high number. It was like 120 or 140 pounds. I was more nervous because ours was the range top one where there was nothing underneath it except cabinet space. I was more worried about my stove falling through than I was actually like breaking the glass because it was a really old house.
So I've got all my jars. I got the lids on, finger tight, 3 fingers, not too much torque. It's still, I'm an old dog learning new tricks, trying not to do it so tight. I'm going to go ahead and put them, hot jars, hot syrup, into the boiling water canner. I'm going to make sure that my water comes back to a boil before I start my time, and this is going to be 20 minutes. You always want it to stay at least an inch over the jar. If you're doing something that takes a long time to process, it has a long processing time, you might want to have a tea kettle set there boiling so that you can add more water and keep it at minimum of 1 inch over your jars.
welcome.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Is that the 941 X?
921.
That's the 920.
This is the 921. It's the most commonly bought one for home canners. They have dedicated a couple production lines just to this one to try to keep up with the demand of this particular one. They do go larger than this and they do go smaller.
Do you use the 941?
I have used every one except the largest one. I don't have a stove that will properly fit that one. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I think if you want to come up here and talk to Tammy, we're getting ready to take a 15-minute break so we can use the restroom. I am going to come back and do one more canning recipe in the pressure canner, and then we can take questions again, but maybe Tammy could like give you a kind of outline.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, good?
Yes. And I think we're going to do another giveaway after the break, so don't
Okay.
just all take off on us. I think there might be one more drawing.
And we're
I'm not
doing
sure. Don't
beef,
quote me.
Beef carnitas when we get back. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with us so far. If you're not coming back for the rest of the canning, I'm Sarah, Peelies and Petals. My name's up there. All of my TikTok information and everything is all. You just need to Google search Peelies and Petals, and it's going to come up with 1,000 things. You can find me whatever avenue is best for you. So thank you guys so much for coming today.
And then I'm Rebel Canners. I'm on Facebook and on YouTube. And I'm the one with the black banner on Facebook because apparently I have like at least 7 copycats that have various weird combinations of my name. So 20 minutes. Yep, 20 minutes on the Cowboy Candy, candied jalapenos. So our timer's up. We've had our Cowboy Candy, candied jalapenos in here for more than 20 minutes now. And so we're going to go ahead and take them out of the water bath. When you lift your jars out, there's a temptation to flip the water and have it go like, turn it like that. You don't want to turn your jars. You always want to lift your jars out straight up and straight down. Don't tilt them. I know you want to dump the water off, but that's not the correct process.
Also, when you're making jams and jellies, fight the urge. Fight it hard to tip that over and see if they have thickened up and gotten like a jelly. You're laughing because you know what I'm talking about. What you're going to do is you're going to break the pectin away from the sugar. And that pectin and that sugar need to marry each other in that jar. And they need to marry and they need to stay married. So if you break them up early, you're going to get a jelly that is runny.
The equipment we're using today, I believe, as far as this stuff, did it come from? I believe it
This
came
come from Lehman's.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this and that really cool funnel with the gauge measurement on it, these all came from Lehman's today, and they're sold at Lehman's. Yes. I think they have some over there when we're done.
No, they're like I think it's a kit, right?
It comes in a kit, I think, with the funnel, what'd I do with it? My debubbler, the funnel, this. Yeah, the magnet. Yep. So you notice this jar I did up doesn't have any of the jalapenos in it. As somebody asked at a break, could you use this brine? So if I have a small batch, it's $16 for that kit. It has can I see it, Becca? It has the, that's not the same one. That's a different one. But it has the debubbler, it has the jar. Yeah. Tell her, here, let me get this one out. Yeah. Go ahead and take that over. So this jar, you notice, didn't have any peppers in it.
I
So
do.
say I'm
gonna say it out
going
loud,
through my gardening
and then I have
process,
it on
and
my
I have
blog,
enough for a
and there's
large
printable
batch,
file with it.
and then I have this extra broth. And then I have just a few more peppers that I could do up. You can open this jar of broth, cook your peppers in this jar of brine. I said broth, but I meant brine. Jar of brine, and recan it. So you could actually use it to make a small batch, again, later in your gardening season. Or, like me, you can just pour it over your roast, bake your roast, and have a nice hot, spicy beef roast. So I'm sorry, Sarah, but that was pretty quick today about the water
No,
bath.
that's all
Does
right. Let's
anybody
get right
have any
into it.
questions about water bath canning?
So what do you do? Take a paper towel and get the water off the top?
Nope, I just let them sit. It's going to evaporate. I don't have to do anything to it. When you take your jars out of the canner, whether it's a water bath canner or it's a pressure canner, I always lay out again, I don't want thermal shock for my glass. I always lay out a thick like bath towel or a thick kitchen towel on my counter because I have a marble countertop that's always a little cool. So I always lay a real thick bath towel or a kitchen towel if you have Formica on your counter. I'm putting the jars directly on a spot where I'm going to let them set for 24 hours. A lot of people say, well, my jar didn't seal. I say, how long did you let them set? Well, I took it out of the canner. It wasn't sealed. No. They don't seal in the canner. They seal in that 24 hours they're sitting on your counter afterwards. So you bring them out, you set them down, you leave them for 24 hours. You don't touch them. You don't take the rings off. You don't wipe them down. You don't look at them. You just pretend and go about your business. They're not there. You don't see them. And then after 24 hours, you take your ring off, you wipe them down completely, and you can put them in storage. At that point, all the food in there is still safe to consume. If it hasn't sealed, then you can go ahead and put it in the refrigerator and safely eat it within a couple days, or you can go ahead and reprocess it if that's your choice, if you have another batch to put it in with something else. But you don't even need to check your seal until it's been 24 hours. And then this is how you check your seal. You see I'm only touching the jar seal, the lid. If you can pick it up by the lid and it doesn't pop off, your jar is sealed. Okay, we were misinformed. These are not in a kit. They are sold separately with the funnel and this.
Not just the two. Well, thank you.
Yes, but they sent us coupons. So anytime there's like a coupon,
Did they have any more over there?
they do not. They sold out after she sent them. Well, see, I'm very happy that you came today, so that and you asked the questions you asked, so that we could fix that.
So what does the funnel do? That it's kind of measuring thing, or
Yep. Headspace. Headspace.
So.
Which is awesome. I have a headspace measure, but I can't read it. It is written on there so lightly, I have to hold it up against the light to see if I'm at the half weight mark or
Yeah. So
that is really unique.
the headspace of a jar, once you start canning pretty normally, you get kind of used to eyeballing this. In the beginning, it's nice to have something that has the stair steps on it. They also make a tool that has stair steps on it that looks like a little stairway. And you can put that into the jar and it will measure a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch, and 1 inch for you, or 3/4 inch. But it's nice to have these in the beginning. After that, you kind of get used to eyeballing them. So the first ring of your jar is approximately 1 inch. The second ring is approximately 1/2 inch, and the top ring at the top is approximately 1/4 of an inch. So you can start eyeballing that once you get used to it.
so is it dependent on what you're doing?
Right, correct.
Yes. If you're
So-
doing
Go ahead, I'm
something
sorry.
like pie filling that's very sugary, very sweet, it tends to boil over, you're going to want like 1.5 inches of headspace, or it's going to come out and it's going to get underneath your lid, and it could cause a failure. And it's also very sticky and gross and all over your jars, and then you got a mess to clean up before you can put your jars away in storage. So you want a lot of headspace for that. But something like the milk that's not going to boil over, you're not doing it for a huge time, you don't need a lot of headspace. I tend to err on the side of always using, you can see, this is about what I use for everything. I just kind of average it, but that's because I've been canning a long time, and that's what I do. But you can see that this I didn't use very much. I water bathed it. It's not going to be boiling over. It's not going to be at a high pressure to come out of that jar. So I didn't use more than a 1/4 inch on that funnel of headspace.
And those are jalapenos?
This is the candied jalapenos. Yeah.
Probably both of you on your website have an apple pie filling.
Yes.
I do.
Okay.
Yep.
I have several pie fillings. I've done the videos on YouTube for several, and I've also done the jalapenos on my YouTube channel, Rebel Canners.
I did that
I'm,
once. And
yeah, on Facebook, I'm the one with the black banner. Beware of copycats.
So I normally do these pork carnitas, but the meat on these is very versatile. So we're doing beef today. You can do this with chicken, you can do it with beef or pork, whatever you like. The carnita flavor really comes from the juices and the spices that are in these. And these are very versatile. So you can throw these on tortilla shells. You could make carnita nachos out of these. They make a quick, easy dinner. You just grab a couple cans of veggies, some corn, some black beans, throw that all on top with the meat, and you have a meal done in 5 minutes, literally, if you stick it in the microwave.
what pork do you use?
Any cheap cut of pork that I can find. So it does not matter. You can use butt, shoulder, any of those big ones.
Dark.
Yep, you could use something dark, you could use something light, you could use light meat or dark meat chicken. It's really just whatever your preference is. For me, it's all about making the best bang for my buck. And with pressure canning, you can buy those cheaper cuts of meat and make them taste very expensive because of the way that they're processed. They're very, very good. All of your meats, we were talking about flavors earlier. All of your meats are, if you've never had canned meat before, when you open up and have that first jar, you might be shocked by the texture or the taste because everything is kind of intensified and it's very soft. Everything kind of falls apart. It's very juicy. Because it's been pressure cooked inside of that jar, it's going to be very soft and flaky for you. So you can take cheap cuts of like pork butt or shoulder and they were just going to fall apart like pulled pork. It's going to taste like you have smoked it for 12 hours and you've been cooking all day and it's a slow temperature, but you're actually getting that done very quickly. So I'm using beef today. Don't ask me what this cut of beef is. It came from the cow that they butchered yesterday, so I'm not really sure. But this will work with any of your beef cuts. It doesn't have to be a particular one. Now I'm going to stuff these in the jar pretty tight because yesterday when we were canning, I did the beef carnitas and I went really light on the meat that was in the jar because I wanted to make sure I had enough for today. So my jars typically do not look half full like this, but meat always shrinks in the jar. And so when I raw pack a recipe like this one, I really pack the meat in there because it's going to shrink, it's going to create its own broth and its own juice, and I want my jars to be full. I am going to leave about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch headspace, but that's because I'm going to add some liquids and some spices into this, and I want to make sure that I'm leaving enough room on top for that.
You're making me hungry for Mexican food.
Good. It's going to smell good in here in about an hour. So I am starting with cold meat. So I'm going to start with a cold canner. Now, right now in there, I have our chicken from this morning. So I'm waiting for that to depressurize. So I don't know if we'll finish that in time for you guys to see this, but I have a backup canner there so I can show you at least how to get the canner started, even if we don't cook it. Now, the one thing that I like the most about doing meats, besides having shelf-stable meat on my shelves, is that it's quick, easy meals. So I'm not really good about remembering to take the food out of the freezer at night for the next day. And I'm definitely not good at deciding what's for dinner because usually by the end of the day, my brain is pretty well fried. And I don't have that thought process to be like, oh, did we have tacos yesterday or was that the day before? So this kind of takes out the guesswork for me. I go to the pantry, what I call the cantry, and I pick a couple of jars and I just throw together a meal real quick. Everything's already cooked in the jars. Everything is shelf stable, so this is really good if you have a lot of power outages or you're living off grid and you want to conserve some of your solar power throughout the day. Your stuff's already cooked, so it's just reheating at this point. So here I have about 1 pound to 1.5 pounds of beef packed tightly into these pint-sized jars. Now, if you have a bigger family, you can definitely use quart jars for this, you're going to get about 2 to 2.5 pounds of meat per jar for the quart-sized jars. I used gloves today because we're on camera. In my kitchen at home, you're not getting that treatment. All right. So to this, I'm going to start adding the spices. So if you want to write this down, great. I also have this recipe on my blog. It is in a PDF printable file, and so you can download it, save it to your phone, or you can print it off if you are somebody that likes to have paper copies. So to each pint jar, I'm going to add half a teaspoon of each. Half a teaspoon of cumin, half a teaspoon oregano, half a teaspoon salt. Now, the salt is optional. When we are canning in a pressure canner, salt is optional. So if you are on salt restrictions or you don't like salty foods or whatever, you don't have to use it. You don't need any preservatives. You don't need any salt when you're pressure canning. So I'm going to add this directly to the jar. Now, I've done this both ways. I've done this where I actually mixed all the spices in the juices before and then like tossed it in the meat and put it in the... I notice zero difference. So I don't waste my time anymore. I just add them directly to the jars. I do it exactly like an assembly line. I can get more food done that way faster. And so that's how I can. Yes, ma'am. Half a teaspoon cumin.
Salt, cumin, and
Oregano. Half a teaspoon, half a teaspoon, half a teaspoon. If you're doing these in quart jars, then you would double that. So it would be 1 teaspoon, 1 teaspoon, 1 teaspoon. Yeah, I can math. If you are worried about the spices, this is the spices that my family likes, but if you are worried about the spices, you can always start with half the amount of spices, and then after you open the jar, you can add more to it. One thing you can't do is ever take away. So if you add too much salt to something, right, we've all done that at some point in our cooking careers, and it's the same thing in canning. You can always add more, you can't take away. Yes? I heard a question. No?
I'm
weird.
gonna interject. But if when you're cooking it and you have too much salt, you add a potato, it will soak up some of that salt. Then when you're done with your cooking time, before you're ready to serve, take the potato out and throw it away. So there is a little trick to taking some of the salt out some of the time,
Yeah, right.
but not while you're canning.
Now the salt doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what kind of salt you use. The stores and the canning books will tell you you have to use canning salt. That's a lie. You can use any kind of salt you want, but what happens is if you're using a salt that has any type of iodine in it, like some of our table salts have iodine in it, some of them have anti-caking agents in them to keep them from caking up on you, those things can become cloudy in the jar. It does not affect the taste of the food at all. It does not affect the safety of the food at all, but what it does is it gets the food kind of cloudy. It doesn't always look as appetizing on your shelves. For me, I use whatever salt was on sale and whatever I have that I've bought in bulk. I'm not about buying expensive canning salt, but that's just my personal opinion. All right, now we're going to add 1/4 teaspoon of each onion powder and garlic powder. Onion powder, garlic powder, about 1/4 teaspoon each. If you want to mix this all in a bowl and save yourself some time, by all means do that. But then you're going to need to calculate how much you need per pint jar. I'm not mathing that, especially not right now, in front of a bunch of people. So 1/4 teaspoon onion, 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder. I think what gives this carnita flavor is the juices, the lime juice and the orange juice. But the wonderful thing about canning is if you have an allergy, if you have a sensitivity to something, you don't necessarily have to use that something. The end product may taste a little bit different, but if you don't like lime juice, use lemon juice. No problem.
And if you're like me, allergic to iodine, leave the salt out. Or if you have high blood pressure problems, they've told you to be on a low sodium diet. The salt in here is only for flavor. You can always salt your food at the table. You don't have to add it to the jars.
Yeah. All right, so next for the liquids, I'm using 1/2 teaspoon of lime juice. And this is just the lime juice from concentrate that you get at the store. If you're going to use real limes, you can do that as well. I would just do maybe a little bit more because it's this is a little more concentrated than a fresh squeezed lime. So I would do maybe half a lime squeezed in there per pint jar. This also gives it like a nice bright and fresh flavor in my opinion. And then orange juice. This is the frozen orange juice concentrate. Frozen orange juice concentrate, the kind that you get in your freezer. It's very, very thick. It is, again, very concentrated. We're going to use half a teaspoon of each.
So you haven't added any water?
I haven't added any water. Yep, this is straight. And it doesn't matter if it's slushy or if it's like mine has thawed out. That's fine.
Half teaspoon, you said?
Correct. Half a teaspoon of frozen orange juice concentrate. Now this is going to make all of its own broth. You can see in that jar that I held up a little bit earlier. All of this stuff is going to marinate inside of the jar. It's going to cook inside of the jar. And it's going to be very, very tasty. This is, I think, one of my more popular recipes when I share this one that I hear back from people and they're like, yeah, that one. That was the recipe. That was the one we really, really liked. So let me think. Bay leaf. 1 bay leaf in each jar. Fresh or dehydrated, doesn't matter. And I normally kind of just make sure that that is not going to disrupt my sealing of my lid at all. So sometimes I have to kind of shove it in there. Can you grab me another package of bay leaves, please? I'm short too. Thank you. And then we're going to talk about putting on our lids. So for this recipe, I'm going to use white vinegar to clean my lids. Thank you, ma'am. Some of these are big, huh?
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah, they're big.
Here for Bay.
So I'm going to wipe these with some white vinegar. This is going to clean any of the powders that I may have gotten off from any of the spices and give me a good seal on my jars. Vinegar is kind of nice too because it also acts as kind of a repellent. So even if you get a little bit of siphoning in your jars, which sometimes that happens, the liquid will come out of the jars and into the canner. This will help repel away any of the fat. Now I'm not going to debubble in this recipe because I did not fill this jar up with liquid. So there's going to be some air pockets in here. As the food is cooking, it's going to create its own broth, and then that broth is going to boil inside the jar with the food. So there's no need to debubble anything when you are raw packing. If you are hot packing, meaning you have heated the food and you have a hot broth or you have a hot brine, you would want to run a wooden skewer or something non-reactive like a kitchen-made plastic spoon, something in there to kind of release some of the air bubbles. Sometimes you'll see people just kind of tap these on the table. That's acceptable too. Again, your kitchen, your rules. You do it how you were taught and what makes you feel comfortable. For me, I just like a light wooden skewer. Is anybody paying attention to if I wiped all the jars?
Yeah, no one.
I was trying to go in order, and then my ADHD kind of took me in a different order. And said, did I get them all?
Yeah.
That was it? That was the last one? Okay, good. All right, so next.
You missed one on the chicken, but I didn't say anything.
Oh, why didn't you say something? I missed one on the chicken. All right, well, we'll see if that one seals. We'll put it to the test. I won't know which one it is in the canner, but we'll see. I'm using the Superb canning lids, and so these do not have to be preheated. I know that is sometimes a hill that people are willing to die on because our mothers taught us to boil our lids, and their mothers taught them. That was because back in the day, these were rubber seals. They were made of rubber, and that rubber really needed to be heated and softened up so it was pliable and it would stick to the jar. Our newer technologies don't use those types of formulas anymore, and so these do not have to be preheated. Even the ball ones. The ball has removed their directions for preheating their lids off the box. So if you look at a ball box of lids from prior to 2000 and, I'm going to get the year wrong, it might be 9 or 10, they will say on them to preheat the lids by adding to warm or hot boiling water for X amount of minutes. The new ball, if you turn their packaging over, that is gone. So in 2016, I started having a bunch of my ball lids fail. And it got to a point I called Ball and I asked why they were failing. And they said, well, how are you processing your lids? And I told them I'm putting them in the boiling water. And they're like, why? And because that's how I was taught. And they said, no, we've removed that direction from the packaging. And sure enough, I turned that box over and those directions were gone. So yeah, they actually don't want you heating their lids because their lids can't really withstand the heat very well. These lids, however, you can't, if that's a hill you're not willing to let go, you can absolutely warm these up. They still seal really nice, but it is not necessary with this blue integrated technology that they have on these. So it doesn't affect anything.
I do have a question.
Sure.
Would you trust, I know we're not sterilizing, but would you trust the cleanliness of the lids right out of the box?
No, I don't.
You wash it.
I wash everything. I wash everything before I use it. So if you're an OG canner, old school canner, we boiled everything. We boiled the jars, we boiled the lids. We were told that was the way to sterilize them before use. And it does help to sanitize them, but you can't sterilize anything in a home kitchen. The minute you take the lid off, Tammy's going to jump in here for a second. The minute you take the lid off and it's exposed to the ambient air, it immediately is exposed to the microorganisms that are in the air. So what we do is try to get those as clean as possible with hot soapy water before using. Sorry.
As far as washing your lids, every brand of lid should be washed before you use it. If you buy canning jars, you take them off, you wash them, you rinse them very good. They have been put through, for some companies, put through a sanitizing process with some sort of sanitizing cleanser, and then they're sitting in plastic. And if you've ever opened a major manufacturer of jars and it smells almost like dead fish to me. And so you really need to get that sanitizer off because you don't want that sanitizer chemical in your food, especially if you're like me and you're allergic to a lot of chemicals. But even so, all of them say to wash with hot soapy water before you use them.
Yes. So now I'm putting the rings on the lids. This is a two-piece lid system. There are one-piece lid systems. There are reusable lids, non-reusable lids. So you have many choices out there, but I'm going to use this two-piece lid system. And this is how I teach in my classes, finger tight. Tammy and I are still joking about this. Her finger tight and my finger tight are very different. 14.8, she's bragging. 1 to 6, I was at a 0.6. So finger tight, unless you have the calibration machine that we were able to play with that can measure torque, you're not going to know what your finger tight is. So this is just a general rule of thumb. I tell everybody 3 fingers on the ring itself. You're going to put the ring on the jar and put the jar on a flat surface that is a skid surface. So you don't want to put it on a tablecloth. You don't want to put it on like a placemat or something silicone. You want it to be able to skid. So I put it directly on my countertop and I use those 3 fingers and I tighten down the ring until it engages with the jar. And then as the jar starts to spin, that is finger tight. That's finger tight. It's not very much. One thing I want to say about these lids, these new Superb lids, is their suction capabilities are incredible. Incredible. If you over tighten this, even if you're using the same amount of torque that you've always used, they may buckle on you. If they buckle on you, you're tightening the ring too tight. It just means that you've probably always done it that way, and that's fine, but you need to learn how to be a little less aggressive. Yep.
If they buckle, they're still fine as long as they're sealed.
I do not use a buckled. If mine buckle, I don't take the chance. I take that jar, I pop the lid off, I put my plastic lid on, and it goes in the fridge, and we eat it that night or that week for dinner, whichever. I just don't trust because I want my food. Right now I'm here. My family is back in Escanaba, 12 hours away. I want peace of mind that when my child goes to grab something off the shelf, they don't know what they're looking for with that safety. I mean, my kids know because, well, my kids know. But I want them to be able to feel safe in the food that they are eating and pulling off the shelf when I'm not there to police that and say, ooh, that lid is buckled. Make sure you smell that first, or make sure you heat that all the way through, 10 minutes, bring it up to a boil. We want to make sure that that's good, safe food. So for me, it's peace of mind. I don't want to put anything defective on my shelves. I want it to be ready to use in the dark when we have no power and no electricity. I want to be able to go grab it and eat it. So.
speaking of the lids, do either of you have a video or something on how to use like the tattlers?
I do. Again, it's on my TikTok. I have one that's called Reusable Lids. It's in the canning FAQ folder. I have different folders for canning, water bath, pressure, prepping, water supplies. I've different folders, and that one is in the FAQ because I get asked that one a lot. The Tatler and the reusable lids do have a little bit of a learning curve to them. Those are the plastic lids with the actual rubber that goes underneath. Those do have to be heated. They do have a different system for how you tighten the rings and then untorque them and then torque them back again. So I do have a video on that if you're interested. Yeah. All right, so this canner is done, but I'm still sitting at about 3 pounds of pressure. So I'm not going to do anything with that one, but I will put these in this canner and then answer any questions you have about that. And as soon as this one is down, then I'm going to start this. You guys are going to go home, and I'm going to sit here and can for the next 2 hours by myself. So. No, I just spinned it to check the pressure. Because I'm sitting at 2 pounds of pressure right now, so I'm just waiting for it to drop to 0 so I can remove this. Ooh, hot. Don't do that. Don't touch your canner when it's hot. Jars are going in. This is a predetermined amount of water that's in this. For this canner in this size, it's 3 inches of water and a little splash of vinegar. The splash of vinegar just keeps my jars from getting cloudy. Anything that you have in your water can make your jars kind of cloudy. So if your water has a little bit of calcium in it or a little bit of iron or any of the things that water carries. Oh, I didn't do that. I did. So I have 1 jar left over. Tammy, maybe could you fill me up like 3 jars of water? I would appreciate that. So what I'm going to do, because I have an extra jar here, the bottom of my canner is full. I have all the jars in there that I'm going to fit on the bottom. And because I have 1 jar left, this is a really good teaching moment and prime example of what to do. I'm going to add a shelf to this. This is the shelf. There's one of these on the bottom that protects the jars on the bottom of your canner. And this one is going to go on top. That shelf allows me to double stack my jars on the second shelf. And your canner size will depend on if you can do this or not. This canner you can double stack. I'm going to have Tammy run me a couple jars of water just to balance this out on the top. Thank you, ma'am. Doesn't matter what they are. No, I'm just going to balance the top out and I think we'll be fine. What's that? No, trust me. It'll go on. It will go on. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just making sure that the jars are kind of all centered. You can fill this up absolutely with more jars. Tammy, this one is not going to fit. I need another wide mouth. Do you have one? Okay. Switch me, ma'am. So what I do is if I need that double stack, I'll run jars of water in here. That's to balance out the canner. You can run another entire stack of 8 if you want. I'm only going to run 3 just for teaching purposes. But then now I have emergency drinking water. So you can save that water and put it on your shelf. You'll have emergency drinking water. This is especially helpful in areas if you have freezing pipes, hurricanes. If you've ever been without water, you know. If you know, you know. It's a headache. Tammy also likes to take hers on camping trips because it makes it easier to transport so they can use when they're camping.
That way it's also pre-measured, so when I go camping, it's less work. I've already done the prep work. I know I got 2 cups in those pints.
Another thing you can do is make sterile saline in these. And so if you want to have like a wound cleaning pack, if you are living on a homestead, you have children, or you're just clumsy like I am, you can make some sterile saline in these. So you just add water and a half a teaspoon of salt to this. I roll up a washcloth or a half a washcloth. I'll cut it in half sometimes, roll it up, put it in there, run it through the sterilizer, and now I have a sterile wound pack that I can use on our homestead, so for cleaning of wounds and stuff. There's always something that you can be running, and every time I'm using my resources, if I'm using my water, I want to be able to use it. If I'm using my electricity or my propane or my wood to burn the fire to heat the canner, I want to make sure that I'm maximizing my resources. So I'm going to run the jars of water or the saline, and I'm going to make sure that my canner is full every time I run it. That's just how I roll. You may roll differently.
You said half a teaspoon of salt for that sterile water?
Yeah, I use half a teaspoon for pints and a full teaspoon for quarts. A quart-sized jar is always double a pint. So whatever you're doing, if you want to double the recipe and throw it in a quart jar, it's exactly double. Okay, the lid itself. The lid has an arrow mark on it and a little notch on the canner. You're going to just line those two things up and turn clockwise, which is counterclockwise for you guys. The bayonet fingers underneath will lock onto the canner handles themselves. And so that's kind of like a protective measure for the canner to make sure that it's locked. You're also going to have these wing nuts, and these are going to come up. Now I'm going to show you how I get this on straight. First thing I do is I just kind of check and see if there's one area of the canner that feels higher than the other. You can see this lid tilts, okay? So I want this kind of sitting even. The number one reason a canner runs out of water or runs dry is because this lid, or maybe you're just having a hard time getting up to pressure, is because this lid is off center. If this lid is off center, steam will escape in between, and you're going to start to lose water eventually, because steam is water. You're going to start to lose the water. So it's really important that this is on kind of even. Jacob Miller, you're being paged. Was that the freeze dryer? I wanted to put my name in for the freeze dryer, but I thought maybe that's bad form. Maybe I shouldn't do that. I mean, I am a spectator too.
Oh, you've been working your tail off.
I know, right?
You work your tail off.
So when I pull these wing nuts up, I pull them up in opposite order and opposite direction of each other. I don't want to pull them up like this, because if I do that, then I'm tightening down the lid on this side, and this side is going to start coming up. So opposite order on the wing nuts. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get down on an eye level, and I'm going to check and see if my seal all the way around is an even seal. I don't want one side having a big gap and the other side having a small gap. And then what I'll do is I'll adjust those wing nuts to make sure that that lid is pretty even. I have, this side of the canner is way down. It's like 1/4 of an inch. And this side of my canner is way up. So what I'm going to do, because this side is tightened down more than this one, I'm going to loosen the wing nuts on this side and then tighten the ones on this side. It's still way off, so I'm going to go back and loosen again on this side and tighten down again on this side. And now I have an even seal all the way around. So that's how you make sure that you have an even seal. If you're not sure if you have an even seal, you can also, when you're bringing this up to pressure, just kind of get down on an eye level and see if there's any steam escaping in between the seal. That's an easy way to do it. And if there is, just turn off the fire and you can readjust. So now I have all of these sealed. The next thing I would do is turn on my pressure. This one is done, so let's pretend that we did this one, and I'll show you how to undo this one. This is hot, you know, because I just tried to grab it with my own hand like a dummy. When you go to release this, my pressure gauge is down to 0. I'm going to take the weight off of it. When I do this, you might hear a little bit of a hiss. That's totally and perfectly normal. Dial gauge is down to 0. There's going to be about 0.5 pounds of pressure in here, even with the dial gauge down to 0. So you might hear a little hiss. Normal. I use what's called the 10-10-10 rule, and for teaching purposes, I'm not going to sit here and make you wait 30 minutes. 10-10 and 10 is 10 minutes, 10 minutes, and 10 minutes. But at my house, the way that I control siphoning is that I make sure that I am controlling the depressurization. So even though my dial gauge is down at 0, you can still see there's steam coming out of here, right? There was still a little bit of pressure in here. So once I take that weight off, I wait 10 minutes. And then after 10 minutes has passed, I unlock my wing nuts, like so. You cannot over tighten these. I've tried to strip them. Like every piece of equipment I ever get, I try to see how I can break it, because that's how I teach. And then, huh? Yeah, Yep, I try to break things purposefully because if I can break it, that means you can break it somehow, and that will help me fix your problem.
I mean, I will break them up.
Yeah. So I've had the vent off, I start a timer, or I just walk away for 10 minutes and whatever, go do something else. At the end of that 10 minutes, I unlock this. You always want to open this away from your face. Whatever you're doing, you never want to open it towards your face because the steam is going to rush out. It wants to be away from your face. So I open it away from my face. Because you guys are sitting in the front row, I'm gonna take the brunt of this, and I'm gonna open it towards me. Yeah, just in case. And then I usually just prop this up a little bit on the canner, like so. This one may not want to stay. And then I wait another 10 minutes. What I'm doing now is I'm controlling any siphoning that may be happening. Siphoning happens because physics does what it wants to do. If you have something that is pressurized, and you put something that is high pressure in a low pressure environment, they try to equal themselves out. So you have a high pressure jar, low pressure ambient air. You take that pot, you take all this stuff out and you try to move those jars right away, you're probably gonna get siphoning. You did, yeah, and it happens. And you'll know when it happens because when you look down inside the canner, you're gonna see, if it was a tomato sauce, you're gonna see red water. If it was an animal product or byproduct, you might see little fat cells floating around in there. You might see some of your broth in the bottom. That's how you know you got siphoning. You can't always get rid of 100% of siphoning all the time, but what we can do is try to reduce that as much as possible. So by slowing down the depressurization, by slowing down how you take this lid off and let these jars cool a little bit, will help determine how much siphoning you have. I also have noticed in the wintertime in my house, because we live in the UP and it's negative 20 with 60-mile-per-hour winds. So if we can heat the house to 70, it's a good day. If I'm canning in the wintertime, I will sometimes, when the timer is up, turn my fire down little by little by little by little until I turn it completely off. And I find that sometimes helps with siphoning in the cold temperatures. After that 10 minutes is up, I take this off. Always, 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 when you take this off, have a plan for it. So if you've got jars and food all over your kitchen and you take this off, have a plan to where you're going to place it because it is very, very hot. And now I leave the jars in here for about 10 minutes. And I just let them kind of cool and get used to the ambient temperature of the air. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but they are starting to pop. The really fun thing about these new Superb canning lids, the other lid companies, when you hear those jars seal, they go ping, ping. But these, you're going to hear them go thud. I should be quiet. Oh, you're not going to do it now? Yeah, so when they come out, they go thud. There's absolutely... It's trying me.
That was right on cue. Thank you, Jar.
Was it on cue? You'll hear a deep thud with those. Layman's did give me this extra, extra nice jar grabber, but some things you just have to have from your house, and this is mine.
I have a security funnel. She has a security jar lifter.
My security blanket. So I would leave these in. Yep. You had a question?
I have yet to ever hear the popping that I just heard.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
What kind of lids are you using?
Bell.
Ball. You might not. You might not. Some things sing louder than others. If you're canning up like broth, would you agree?
Yeah, broth. When you're pressure canning something, like you can see that still bubbling, it's going to make a bigger pop than water bathing these jalapeno peppers. Just because it's been under higher pressure.
But in there, like with my meat, everything, I've never heard it pop.
And it might be sealing before you're even taking the lid off. Yeah, so you might not hear it. Yeah. Sometimes they... No. It just means you're probably not hearing it because it's inside the canner. You can hear these inside the canner because, like I said, these lids thud. There's no mistaking that these lids have sealed. They make a deep thud. Mm-hmm. They're really fun to listen to seal.
You can see your stuff is bubbling in there.
Yep. So what I've done is I've created a vacuum inside this jar. I've driven out all the air. There's no air left in here, and air is what causes our food to spoil. So I've driven out all the air in this jar, and it is boiling. This jar will continue to boil for up to 24 hours. Even though it will be cool to the touch, I will be able to pick it up with my hands, move it around, and do things. You really want to leave them for 24 hours because you've created this vacuum and they continue to boil. Because water has a lower boiling point in a vacuum environment than it does on Earth. So now that I've created a vacuum, it's going to continue to boil for a while. All right, we'll take a few questions, but I'm done. Thank you guys for coming. Okay, I know you guys have stuff you want to pack up and get home and stuff, but yeah, if you have questions.
Sure that the cold air might cause those to shatter?
No,
It won't.
no. I'm not putting these in the refrigerator or anything. Typically when I can outside, this is nice because we've got the tent that is blocking most of the wind, but it is definitely colder out here. So I would expect to get more siphoning when I am canning in a colder environment than a warmer environment. So you may see some siphoning coming out of these jars. I don't yet.
You kind of rushed and you didn't do your 10-10.
I didn't do my 10-10-10. But I can tell you, even without my 10-10-10, you guys can come take a look in the water if you want. I don't have any siphoning in there. Watch your face, it's hot.
It's hot. Yeah, be careful, it's
75
really hot.
minutes for pints, 90 minutes for quarts. So your meat products, minus fish, fish is longer, 75 minutes for pints and 90 minutes for quarts. That's it, 10 pounds per pressure for my elevation. If you're higher up in elevation, you'll can at a higher weight. You'll can at 15 or 20.
I've never got the fish.
110 minutes for half pints. Half pints.
How do you get more pressure than 15 pounds with that weight? You said 15 or 20, but how do you get more than
Some of the pressure canners go up to 20. It's not typically used in residential and home canning. It's commercial canning.
Milk plus vinegar equals cheese. If you wipe the
Yes,
jar
your
rim
elevation
of the milk
doesn't change
with
that.
vinegar, or you put that splash of vinegar to help prevent the mineral buildup in your canner, you will create cheese in your jar. It will not be appetizing. It'll still be safe to use, but who wants chunky milk? It just doesn't appeal to anybody. So you don't want to make cheese.
Have you, I bought some of the plastic rims, poly rims from down here, from the vendor earlier. She said that you can use them in the pressure or water bath, and they don't melt. Have you ever used them, and do you recommend them, or do you know anything about them?
I haven't had the opportunity to use them yet, but I do know a lot of people that have from my canning group, and they've been happy with them. And the other thing is they don't rust.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah, they don't rust.
I'm not big on plastic,
Yeah,
because it doesn't get
but it's not in my food. I like plastic when it's not in my food, and that's not in my food. So I would use a plastic one if I had it available to me.
friends who like them.
And I have friends who like them.